activating Wayne State LM. Do you know who data feeds it? Emory J.
Everyone ready?
Yes, sir.
Cool. The United States Federal Judiciary should conduct a judicial experts review of the United States targeted killing operations to advantage one as war fighting, domestic and international support for usual programs, relapsing with shut down downtown, former ski Zenko. In 13, the also be forced by domestic and international purposes as to get back on the truth based by drone policy, reform, the design of history, jump shifts, political pressures, civilian limit race, shows reform susceptible to political change because they currently place at a negative trends already appearance more probably 80%, 60% shows are only posted by important islands, emerging powers, population, shows required attack, first one, host states, and non-cooperative resistance factors, BB, the sharply reduced, civilian countries, would increase Pakistan, affected all U.S. military trends, from resistance, legitimate security, bombs, evaded, deploying drones to attack EQA, and which one, like, regarding new air basing, would fully baited U.S. modified drone policy. Drones are critical to resolve U.S. military overreach that collapses power generation capability, relative control of the drone program, reduces risk of service members, decrease American awareness of minimized civilian casualties, allow mission without putting U.S. troops in our base. Americans to for some good news and can deliver never running damage to some shows that able committed to the committed to determine a future action is necessary to facilitate the accident environment where it seems to be dangerous for troops. The public is grown tired. We're trying to complex foreign intervention. The drone program offers one battle foreign intervention. The executive committee and president probably the meeting up with argued that his full focus remains on no overreach will collapse in Germany, risk hostile challenges, nuclear war, fire, content, has lost and stand forever. Need for U.S. to engage in conflict, Republicans who will run this abuse and nation has run against Vietnam and Russia. The American citizens and should these states over battle. The second visible church becomes deep. The city health is adrenaline more wanted to avoid new challenges. Is that what saying U.S. agenda China's size Robert making major power similar operation Russia is fallen, but as here shows making recovery possible wars in the perfect become quite deadly. And the nuclear weapons lose power projection capability resolves every scenario for extinction versus C12 the common effect nuclear by inciting effects and confidence they receive the U.S. retreat from regions are lose confidence guarantees they seek nuclear weapons against the also great intent is fear from the ripple effects what increases likelihood of miscalculation nuclear traffic climate reduces likelihood of achieving cooperative agreements on resource management records of timers equal greater opportunities for emerging powers deployed environmental increasing the chance of research over confidence and appears disease development of false scale confidence development of false scale confidence the blood of the if they receive the U.S. retreat from research lose confidence guarantees they seek nuclear weapons and also great oh I already read that part. Agrees on resource management, market traffic, great opportunities, emerging viruses, deploying environmental increasing chance, research over confidence, hedges, development, full-scale confidence, letting ecosystem collapse, economic be reversing, essential to getting electrons to cooperate in direction of a global confidence, space, space, nuclear world, project, air period of the geopolitical stability, eventual absence of influential over my community, legitimacy of the drone program is critical support. Kennedy in 13, the debate over legitimacy of drones taking place, and the impact on ourselves, legitimacy to free progression of foreign policies without injection that is understandable, use or significant consequences on the public debate, national stability, oversight by believers, drones are feeling oversent by reaction based on the question regarding the legality deterrent orders, specifically the outlets and military legitimacy question, rights, drones of danger, metal, relations with also may cause deeper disruption, which will undermine U.S. export global principles, U.S. will engage in show that things are not derailed. U.S. counterterrorism efforts are failing. Over-reliance on drones result in civilian deaths and causes blowback, terrorist recruitment, and uses civilian deaths for recruitment and fundraising. That's key to the resources recruitment. 13, the problem for Washington is programs to take on a life of its own. The way protect their strategy rather than the other way around. The drone force Al Qaeda, the danger, behavior, keeping them preoccupied. There might be reason to believe that drone checks are running Washington's goal about kind of propaganda continued. Uninterrupted drone systems and significant hints about the propaganda approach of Al Qaeda is about able to track recruits and research about markets and function more training industry advance against most of the secrecy. Washington's drone program. Let's go to the legislature deadly. Let's discriminate the U.S. is losing water perception. Keep our the campaign. The mistake. The use of active international term balance on so to make sure the local insertion made local users short-term rate interventions such as drones result rarely selectively transparency and against only those who can actually target the U.S. Lack of transparency in the drone program will collapse ally cooperation on terrorism is critical to a challenge in sharing human rights. First 13 governments raise a serious concerns about the president U.S. targeted for policy aside that in fact under the U.S. counterterrorism members of the U.S. allies security practice intelligence sharing on the foreign counterterrorism cooperation because of operational and legal concerns about targeted programs between U.S. relations allies and people with critical intelligence about the terrorist operations. Ally cooperation is critical to solve counterterrorism. For counterterrorism, McGill grade 12 the WT requires high levels of intelligence to identify the use of efficiency counterterrorism based on allies. U.S. counterterrorism doesn't have the resource to monitor every terrorist had out having the ability to cultivate cultural linguistic or CT knowledge of possible hinders allies must be just in order to state operations. Al Qaeda is fighting an attack now by 13 Al Qaeda is at war. Federal Judges Mali Bali given Pakistan and Ragab Mali U.S. gets decided by a person some protection of Al Qaeda. The organization remains a bizarre based on charge Al Qaeda's support affiliates of Mali state victims attack on foreign workers on Algeria to change strategy. A cabinet as again one step further gone after the U.S. outside the region twice while attack on U.S. civil aviation. They use nuclear biological weapons. Alice and 12 had Irwin's microbiologist from 2001 thirds of distributed agents, but this right they could version of the show sends thousands would attach to the other one Dragonfire report really that Al Qaeda that was supposed to be correct nation given consideration of a million of Al Qaeda affiliates who are highly restricted to the construction nuclear battle battle levels rather than reverse actions capable of making passages and produce massive casualties. Nuclear terrorism causes extinction. Morgan and I, the best way to escalate tension nuclear war set off nuclear change. All terrorists have to do is the other hand small nuclear operation retaliate use it would be really retaliation to be held up on next and mistaking communication false into low mode or active sabotage. She's going to unleash nuclear weapons like rapid escalation nuclear attacks where how you try to protect out of the state use the strategy to use what and interpret as being used good because one of the words like all use leading to the structure civilization. Same with bioterror, same we're going to be physically registered for emergent technique and possible engineering pathogen capable of stage unlike other ones pathogens self propagating a lot smaller and exponentially destructive for the most pandemics and engineering pathogen might be capable of causing extinction. Only judicial review provides the due process necessary to solve public confidence in targeting Corey into all targeting decisions can be subject to judicial review. Exposed when services navigation of executive power independent reviews necessary to have shown accountability, bolster confidence and viability of future legal targeting decisions and questionable government failures to legitimation, transparency, accountability, targeting decisions must be subject to independent review that would satisfy both the process and boost public confidence. Court action is critical to the U.S. credibility and stop power. Student 11 the course of evaluation of case and wartime conscious the nation has been faithful to the rule of law. The legal process process, not some of the victories of the judicial system, make legal stop out of national security, be made aware of American Constitution framework, the judiciary's active system, creation, make a like the nation of people, moderate Muslims will be checked in American judicial review for the American national security, for policy objectives, even when I have to direct the executive arm, suspended war, laws of taken legislator, may be considered a victory for the entire nation, neglected, the president of the war of ideas, judicial branch of prosecutor, America's empire, and each tool, and president of the conflict. Judicial review is the only mechanism for creating transparency, reducing collateral damage, executive rule can't solve it, just 12 judicial inclusion, conditions, accuracy, targeting selection, reason the danger of state, illegal, judicial rights, double check decision, get shares, executive officials don't make it in the first place, just knowledgeable. Okay, so you do the security consideration for decision making process law, judicial oversight for SFP. This will actually strengthen the president power to take decisive action. Worried about judicial consequences, second by to get another word conferred by the judicial rights. Advantage two is modeling U.S. targeted killing policies are causing international drone stars race. The mere existence of tech doesn't make it inevitable. How the U.S. uses the matters for 11 is the world about it. See drone stars racing. One major practice of racing is already happening. As a result of U.S. normal drone usage, China versus people and playing a venture against them. Armed races aren't funded in political damage. China versus representing capabilities vigorous because the U.S. example states feel the need to procure the same type of weapon. Any effort to use of drones will require U.S. access as a favor of the U.S. instruction. How the world will think about building use drones. Current over reliance on drones as an international model for targeted claims without legal restraint. Only external checks and the executives can create norms for transparency, accountability. Version 13 and 7 instances of executive officials consider every issue board after meeting that a church is lawful. That is some full government for president for law as established like space justice as a rather trust as a rather shaky foundation for the rule all setting in trouble. International president of other states will follow America's example. They justify killings using legal theories. U.S. uses we should use this point of opportunity to advance robust legal normative framework that public against abuse instead of articulating norms by transparency, accountability. U.S. is handing every repressive state deployment how to form instability, give way for murder. This is where tradition versus sovereignty and its potential is ability to destabilize the article of shaky security regime with the U.S. state convention over what constitutes the Russian other states make identical arguments. These conflicts will go nuclear boil in 13. Civilian international system will be radically reshaped by drone tech great powers. It should provide nuclear deterrence. One can imagine two states to deploy just attention like capabilities resolve until consequences are were misinterpreted. Drones get so all of the they should use it by virtue. Strong drones are the term relations of the disappearing nuclear powers magnifying the risk of conflicts by ground control. The plan gives the United States diplomatic leverage to prevent drone proliferation or the Zenko 13 norms can deter states from requiring new tech norms can dissuade states from developing relations and landmines biological and news framework proposed by U.S. Example, KJ Pro even a hostile states United States norms regarding the regulating the existence of international border framework to observe Washington's ability to apply diplomatic pressure to the war can despite proliferation just done by U.S. interests would be lethal will be enforced no longer needs yet. He's the borders of sovereign states. Judicial review of the military is collapsing now. Judicial deference over targeted killing results in an unchecked executive McCormick 13. The victims of the war on terror has been in defense use of judiciary. Judiciary virtually elected office by the role in the system of judiciary with pressures amount by created under that exception to establish rule law and due process law targeted killing all walkers reported as having been in place in the kill of voting accountability had the same attitude of the judiciary rather doesn't work at this not high standard judicial independence and killing U.S. citizens as escape judicial review under best under a variety of excuses. The weight of unreviewed executive is the weight of tyranny. The United States has modeled internationally deference to the executive causes judicial inaction. Independence is key to proper rule of law. Kronatsky in 2009. I'm thinking about globalism that should be proactive isolation is either attractive or feasible. It's the question of whether transitional legal rules involve the question of how they will involve the role the U.S. will play. The U.S. contributes to global discussion. The question of refusing to redefining domestic law, bringing it to conformity with relating foreign entities. Our credibility is taken hit our paper as it has had the effect of modeling acceptable government practices. Whether we wish that effect or not, we should be cautioning accepting the discretion of the executive as by convincing others that they will observe human rights to be that we observe ourselves U.S. as a better basis. That's all that is supporting legal ideas and notion limited government has become commonly accepted. The short-term separation of course becomes standard feature of modern democracy. Separation of powers has become global norm. The American model is one of modern governance. Microsoft Windows operating system is a competing. We will participate in new legal system of globalism. Whether we choose to actively have to participate in the process or passive recipients of the result. Russia specifically models us in aid versus judicial system continues has incorporated new democratic forces, legal professionals of the United States, American, the Russian-American rule of law because already involved Russian legal institution implement reforms by using American legal system as model. Russian judicial leaders have been able to visit the U.S. American judicial system. It's critical. The rule of law reforms are critical to Russia's economy. RIA and 13. A number of investors pointed out its division rule law and effective regulation like transparency yet to address. So the Russian gets the economy need to support the government with a clear parameter sailing. An executive said we need to clear sustainable and predictable regulatory system as to identify the most important requirement for foreign investors. Head of American Chamber of Commerce have predictability with a low rate of economic growth. We are on the edge. Private investment is essential to increase the rate of economic growth. That causes nuclear war, filter 9 of Russia's economic health, political stability. Or to try Russia remains one of the only two nations under the nuclear arsenal sufficient government capability to ensure the more national economic crisis. They could transform to upheaval, virtually stabilize upheaval, security forces, guarded nuclear arsenal without pay leading to fears that personnel will suddenly go over the creating economic crisis. We're deteriorate much further. How the security nuclear arsenal will remain. The judicial review has to go ahead. The court has to go it alone in order to solve judicial independence. Reinhardt, the sexy administration argued the president doesn't inherit powers in CSC. Actions have been taken or not reviewed by the courts as a church to get rid of the chance for the judicial independence. They see the wrong proposition that a broad range of cases that the administration view related to the president says the CSC. The administration stands raises the question about how the system should operate. Questions the judge should not short term resolving. And economic decline is bad in Russia. David in 99. If internal war does not strike Russia, economic deterioration will be the prime cause of major power like Russia. But it does not some real war, privately learned or struggles in Russia. It is least building neighbors damage from fighting particularly technical nuclear plants, but poisoning the environment much in Europe, Asia, and the second civil war might produce a horrific regime. Market regime.
Alright, the plan creates has the court conduct a judicial ex post review.
Yep.
So if the executive were to respond to the plan by not doing what is required and like assuming the negative wins this argument that like Obama's just like middle finger to this court process, is there still a part of the app that solves?
Well, the judiciary would still be acting independently.
Okay, cool.
There would still be credibility for the program because of judicial review.
So is the Supreme Court, the federal judiciary, like what court is it?
We say the federal judiciary.
Just the federal judiciary,
yep.
Okay.
And evidence says that the judiciary should act.
You sure that's going to be your final
Our evidence says so far we've read evidence that said
This is-
judicial review is sufficient to solve our advantages. There's no resolutional mandate for us to specify what more that
am
means.
I right that the plan does not create a new court? It just uses existing courts.
Plan does not create a new court.
Okay.
There's no drone court. That
and then what does it mean to have an post facto review? Like, is it just that non-civilians and people who are
the
victims
distinction
of
is
target
between
strikes?
when the distinction is between
I
when the
understand what
punishment
like the ex
happens.
versus post, like what happens though. So does that mean like people who have been victims of drone strike attacks or their family members can now like sue for civil damages?
That's an example of how an ex post review could be implemented.
All right, what's the one the plan does?
We read evidence that ex post judicial review is sufficient to solve. That's what you just asked is like a solvency DA link question of how that would be implemented.
Well, I think that unless you have a mechanism for what the review process is, I don't understand what the AF solves.
Our evidence says creating an ex post review mechanism is sufficient to solve for
like
judicial
do people who
independence,
are killed by
legitimacy.
drone or who are affected by drone strikes get a right to civilly sue? Like
that's an example. A Bivens remedy. What you're talking about is a Bivens remedy, and that is an example of implementation.
All right, what are the other examples?
Another example could just, like, for instance, being the executive going to jail, although that may be less likely than
let's talk
Bivens
about
remedy.
that then. Zanko card, which is the
relief,
internal link to the norms advantage. I'm about to read the conclusion for you here. The U.S. should undertake the following specific policy recommendations. Executive branch limit target killings to individuals and signature strikes review. Authority for strikes split between the CIA and the JSU. Provide information to the public.
Well, you're reading this kind of fast. I don't really understand.
I'm pointing out that there's a ton of things the act doesn't do. Never conduct non-battlefield target killings without an accountable human being. Authorize the first strike. Demand regular White House briefings on drone strikes. On these short-term long effects of U.S. target killing. Maintain the emphasis on Category 1.
None of those will matter as long. Hold on. Wait, this is like you made your point. There's a big list, but all of our evidence says that the executive will be deterred from acting irresponsibly if ex post
review
review
let's talk
exists.
about that then. We have just established that you have no defense of what the ex post review is. How is it?
I don't think that's what we established. We established that you tried to get a link to some Vegas argument or pick, and then we said that didn't compete.
It was a solvency argument. So
it wasn't. No, it's not even a solvency argument because our Adelsberg evidence says an ex post review mechanism is sufficient.
Ex post review split between the CIA and JSOC authority?
That's a totally irrelevant question because Obama's scaling back the CIA strikes now.
Does it do signature strikes or ban signature strikes?
Our plan says targeted killing.
Okay, so none of these things are done.
No, our evidence says that the executive would be deterred from taking irresponsible action because they wouldn't want to be liable for doing something bad.
Is the argument. How do you know it's a deterrent
also
effect
it creates,
if you don't have a single mechanism for what that effect is?
Our evidence is creating an ex post mechanism sufficient.
Do you mind if I use your stand?
Yeah.
It's 1 and C Octos. 5 off, 1 and then 2.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Anyone not ready?
Oh yeah, I haven't gotten a chance to pull it up yet.
You got a timer?
Yeah, it's right here. Travis installing. Yeah, my computer hates your flash drive.
Do you have another flash drive? I'm gonna say one on there for you.
It's just like it just stalled for a second. I'm sure it'll come up like real quick.
There was a goalie fight in an NHL preseason.
All right, awesome. I just got it. Cool. Sorry about that. I need it. Oh, you haven't gotten it yet?
How could that ever?
I give it to you.
Interpretation restrictions are ex ante. Restriction means prohibition. Corpus. Church Count 31 restriction for rent. For maximum restraint that by prohibitions on authority in the context of targeted killing. Ex ante, not exposed to non-fleur. 10 prohibitions on government action. Do something that they can redefine or ignore by. Then it's prohibition if it's then describe such ways to exclude from it's which reach every act and control prohibitions are meant to restrict crime behavior ex ante not to facilitate avoidance through expert justification turns to or distinguishing prohibitions what's clear to find what's allowed with not allowed otherwise the purpose to direction to maintain ad hoc even after fact prohibitions provides to right to clear to provide advanced protection to ensure that through their banned action are not taking a clear definition of assassination and it is necessary to turn words to permit what is forbidden vote negative limits half interpretation means anything that makes it slightly more difficult for a bomb to execute its authorities restriction that's unlimited makes it burden because what is difficult is inherently subjective ground means asking infinite number of areas of claim advantages off judicial review that's core negative ground because we don't get X their authority good because the act doesn't restrict X off the plan restricts all targeted killing operations as a blanket review applied despite the authority used as distinct or extra topical the majority of U.S. targeted killing programs that occur under covert authority Mazzati 13 the CIA approaches to know contract for the agency to begin up to espionage and paramilitary organization the CIA has since conducted hundreds of drones that kill drones the CIA the CIA has all drone flights in Pakistan would operate under covert action authority that's distinct from more power authority Ramash 89 covert effort to covert action more powers command to not all covert operation or warlike Congress to sincerely decide to deal with the country's covert operation is differently for more powers not apply to covert action Congress there's a country choice to exclude threats of resolution intelligence legislation give the rest of the importantly with the two statute choices schemes different dramatically intelligence legislation serve unlawful covert action intelligence is an ideal situation for session next to counter covert political action vote voting issue grounds steals funding shifts loopholes and catalog ground proofs to resolution insufficient outside jurisdiction solvency booster get to be have more branches more access to education policy making discussion of specific context of authorities key Glicksman 13 is to realignment to the working companies illustrate title of scholars and also makes it fail to clearly identify different dimensions along which authority may be structured differently than what these dimensions to better eliminate the advantages and disadvantages of a option top to all the allocation of authority is and it's context specific next off the United States Congress should really the president is legally accountable to judicial and exposed review of the United States target killing operations if the president does not adhere to the statutory principle outlined above the Congress should seek redress the Supreme Court should accept certain congressional action solves international signaling Rooney states restrictions not being answered by the court the judiciary and church court process to take too long what if you see this particular case the community wants to know whether the U.S. is going to important national treaties international treaties the needs to happen quickly so let's not controversial way is for the House Congress to act congressional legislation to rise to detect the best movement for Americans painted the U.S. to protect terrorists would provide the international community to talk about the answer Congress must legislate the U.S. can convert from as they talk to national consensus with both confidence cooperation with that home and abroad the executive ignores the counterplans Greenwald 11 statutes to replace any limits rights to determination of these positions of the Constitution are for the President to make the White House the White House force ahead of military action if the Congress has to resolution exchange the mission the administration of all types of constitutional action Obama's power has involved the U.S. to make major war without even the brief text of congressional approval no executive non-compliance leads to legal incorporation of the act before will rule against the executive of Congress has explicitly legislated on the question to follow central justice to decide more power to case with the executive limit of the court looks to see the Congress has authorized the action of the FDA if not the court without allowed the executive action to up to Congress to restrain the change self-proclaimed power of the executive when Congress limits the executive authority by service of the court allowed to suit the shows the courts for Congress not the executive of places the also Congress to take decisive action next the inside bond is challenged rests under the CWC on two grounds a narrow argument that the treaty did not apply to her and a broad argument that the law has violated the Constitution February 28 the Supreme Court through the bond versus the U.S. bond challenge the government's interpretation CWC inserted the treaty does not apply to the KHG also the CWC implementation law actions of contrary to because it exceeded Congress's authority to pass legislation to implement this treaty and avoid federalism the court's going to make a narrow ruling now avoiding the broad ruling concerns CWC gun constitutionality Ramsey and bond versus the United States that's the Supreme Court made interest in narrow decision in favor of responding to the reaching significant federal questions. One way to do this is to redistribute narrowly not to reach a local context of the court decides to get more aggressive. They'll have votes for a sweeping ruling body. 13 the court has the option to bond a victim to the third court service ruling on narrow three statements to grant to avoid the major constitutional question of the court should address the scope of the treaty clause out on 5 justices are likely likely but issues sweeping rules Robert Scalia Thomas legal attempts to adopt the narrow scope of construction Kentucky Kennedy seems unlikely to. Here's something far hard to argue for nearly amount of federal powers through treaties in the aft. Causes the courts make a broad ruling empirics prove that liberal decisions embolden it to make an extremely conservative position. Then the next highly visible case, Hasten 13 Roberts, surviving the side of the floor, members not holding how the other reaction to the person was. This is there goes right over the connection between the two cases. This seems to say, none of all the issues with the persons. Observation seems correct, and justice concerned with the court's reflection to be given in one case below capital spin. Another crossroads the case continues, decisions states that clearance could do. Other infractions of the voting rights act and narrow ruling is key to street credibility, broad ruling collapses a trap. And all 13 felonies were hard to prosecute or individual case would not bring international concepts of case to take into isolation, which usually cases with carbon everything. Whole having to get away from the scope of the convention to implement the legislation of the another matter there's a court not to create and not to accept for the conventions to implement legislation for local criminals liability. Judicially correct to craft exceptions in this case that open the doors for parties. The new exception future cases in the U.S. and abroad collapses. Collapses global arms control and chemical biological and nuclear weapons travel all 13 bond. Just a lot of departments to discover requiring the U.S. to prevent plus states to make it possible for the U.S. Congress to severely how the ability you have to exert power and influence judicially limitations to the ability to implement the CDOC would adversely affect other arsenals to trees including biological nuclear weapons impacts extinction Mueller to case on great power competition to these constructive errors these references to make sure major violence pivotal task agreements pretty severe to confidence building able transition cooperative for relation to arms limitation agreements when it manufactures terms of stability ecological safety the survival of human life on earth global reduce the chance of conflict the framework they enshrining gender just to security help reduce conflict to serve purposes only concerns available to strip compliance tax off Obama's pushing to Congress to resolve the debt ceiling PC's key pace 912E zero on public contract that's agenda his progress to attention on the strength to have to standing Obama start restraint refocus militaries to have to direct down still fragile economy Obama as long as we make progress on matters and seconds from the status to creep on the face to face with public raising conditions that limited Obama is insist he won't negotiate the GPA will insist on current spending restrictions on authority a loss disposal of that's only portions I told Obama directly the law of use of budget battles reforms will not use there's only so much only so much means the President of Congress last week the risk of there's no firewall between issue failure and one of the problems the debate over theory we have to debate one sorry for the thing as long as Senator Obama has not to undermine on the world stage the appeals the appeal resonated and causes nuclear war free burden to lay there are consequences of the collapse of the wars fighting next architecture and North Korea attempting to their relatives bastards to have vaccinated Afghanistan are progressing down the North Korea's research military siege China will go to give rise for consider their safety connected their culture just trade ground all rogue states using vain professors they do trace leadership to detention from internal controls with external adventures now the first advantage they don't solve any of the apps Zinco Evans has multiple the Zinco app has multiple card has multiple recommendations which causes no impact to Germany empirics proof that otherwise 10 U.S. actions and not contributed there literally to believe the stabilized powers of the U.S. hedge fund there's a relationship between the level of American actors and stability of the more the United States against political concerns are enhanced to address power acting to the arms and regional violence of the rest of the world acted and so the threat of international war was not a pressing concern and no buyer takes terror distinction break one the crisis and expert file PW said the threat of the virus would be wiping out the entire U.S. nations even the most horrific fires after the outbreak in history eventually saw prevention restrictions definitely involving medical treatment overcomes the outbreak no impact to terrorism ruler channel plans make it impossible to survive any individuals have the likelihood of that other response serious of them becomes vanishingly small adopting the problem on the estimates purposely heavily biased the case of the terrorists favor the chance of the concentrated effect piece successful comes out to less than 1 cumulative onto the whole off the drops down to 1 to 3 billion now the other advantage their boil evidence is about surveillance which is they don't solve that drone prolove increases drone prolove doesn't increase conflict Dolan 13 perhaps especially to know the problem to perhaps the solution to players they hold weapons to deter these common prolove drone check may result deterrence paradigm provides and Charles check on deployment no Russian decon impact black hole 9 did Russian decon to modify Russian policy no policies on is setting path forward also principles here say nothing no objectives to change my economic crisis.
If the app can't deal with the majority of targeted killings topically, what targeted killing app is there?
Well, there are multiple apps on the authority on Obama's War Powers Authority.
No, I'm asking about your first T violation, not
yes.
targeted killing. You said the majority of ones are covert and the app can't deal with them. What app is there then under your interpretation about targeted killing?
All military strikes or
yes.
restrict authority on all
but if you ban all strikes, you still can't topically ban the CIA stuff. That app just loses to the
that's
CIA.
not a War Powers strike.
Argument. And that's just the reason why.
Yeah, that's like a solvency argument that's impossible for the app to deal with.
No, that's not true. There are a bunch of evidence about why military strikes are particularly bad.
And there are tons of process-based advantages
based on
oversight.
That sounds like a reason that our app is still TV. he said. Okay, you say an ex ante court would prohibit. You say an ex ante court prohibits, but an ex post one doesn't. What is the distinction for prohibiting strikes? Our plan says it's illegal for Obama to kill people without due process. It just enforces it after the fact.
Well, false, because Obama can still conduct those strikes. So even if you are
Obama
right
can still conduct strikes in an ex ante court. He can just say, "Screw you, court. I'm doing it anyway." It seems like every
right. The question is where the regulation
of what the
happens.
restriction targets.
Our restriction says Obama can't kill without due process.
I'm going to
It
clarify
punishes
this before
him
you mess
after
it up
the
in
fact.
the 2AC. Restriction, Obama's authority is his ability to determine those attacks and then launch them. The restriction is not on that part of his authority.
Our plan still makes that illegal. Okay.
No, because he can still launch
it does.
the attacks.
We have read evidence that it does. Your counterplan that has like the Congress take this to court.
Yes.
Why wouldn't it just be better to vote affirmative and have the Supreme Court and have the court limit the executive's authority directly? Why do we need to have this huge loop to loop?
Because there's a net benefit to it.
What is that? What is the distinction between the plan, having the judiciary rein him in, and having Obama be humiliated in front of Congress? Why is the counterplan better than the plan?
Because there's a net benefit to it.
How's the court capital DA net benefit? You literally have the court punish Obama for circumventing something.
Sure. So
how does that not restrain
two
the
parts of the
decision
net
on Obama?
benefit? One is a time distinction. So obviously the AF would happen immediately. The counterplan would obviously take some time for Congress to sue Obama, and then
How
go to
long
court.
does the counterplan take to sue Obama?
I don't know.
The first
What do you
time
mean?
he
Hold on.
Yeah, the
Your
first
whole net
time he
benefit-
strikes.
Hold on. Your whole net benefit is predicated upon there being this time frame delineation.
No,
In a world like
let me answer the
counterplan-
second part of the net benefit, or why it's net benefit. It is perceived differently if the courts are enforcing something that Congress has already passed legislation on, which is what the last piece of evidence says.
Why wouldn't the court feel like they need to restrain themselves when they're attacking
Well, the court
Obama?
feels like it's acting as more legitimate in that instance.
Okay. Speaking of the court capital DA, the ruling
Yes.
on NLRB, there's a huge federalism case in Michigan. Why is our plan the key swing vote?
What?
Why is our plan like the key deciding issue that makes them say,
This
"Oh,
is
we
the
gotta
first
lean
thing.
back"?
Well, a couple distinctions. One, this is the first thing that the courts will take up when they go back.
But they don't release the
in
decisions
session.
till June. It seems like there's an entire year.
That's not true.
That is true. They release all controversial decisions in June. That's why healthcare came out in June and DOMA. So they hold on to the controversies. Okay. How does the plan make it impossible for Obama to exercise political capital?
January. What?
How does the plan make it impossible for Obama to exercise political capital?
In terms of the debt ceiling debate,
Yeah.
It makes him look weak, which allows the Republicans to undermine him. Thank you. That's not mine.
Your food's behind you, bro.
Who's this
Are you
for?
doing anything with CS? where. I think that would just.
The order is warfighting. Modeling. T restriction. T authority. Congress. The court politics to say. Politics. Everyone ready?
One and number one, yes, there is solvency judicial review, the process sufficient enough, at least to no statutory recommendations in our letters, echo evidence of future debts, echo items, market core evidence, number two, debts, and risk impact, Japanese renewal, solve allied proliferation, counterbalance, risk calculation, trade, economic integration, that solves multiple scenarios for the cover for evidence, cites hundreds of years of data, and there is a bioterrorism impact, or evidence, and terrorists are currently paying all scientists to build diverse mechanisms and diseases that will result in the extinction of the human race. Number four, there is nuclear terrorism, high risk nuclear terrorism, LSWC, international relations, Texas terror, Al Qaeda, documents that say that are buying technology from the black market, and that means they already have the motive of an attack, least calculation, and nuclear war, that's our environment evidence now, the modeling advantage, number one, they say there's where surveillance and there's only covered, they are intricately linked together because they drone processes are dual use, they can be utilized for drone, for surveillance and for warfighting capabilities. On the step 1 and 2 into 1 and C number 2, they say there is a conflict, our broad evidence indicates that as a result of utilizing drones in the cheap way of engaging in war and politically stable waging in war, it increases the risk of conflict because it reduces the cost of war, and there is a Russia impact, it's assumed economic decline, which results in people sending nuclear weapons, which means that the United States has to attack Russia, or Russia will attack the United States in order to maintain their sovereignty because they need to maintain legitimacy, not topicality restriction, judicial review of attorney is not a face restriction of executive authority, becoming and 11 DOJ challenge unlocking the grounds of executive authority are to get limited and violating boundaries of separation, judicial power, government asserted the decision was not just to conducting judicial review and infringement on executive authority, the court expresses comfort in the implication due process executive power, and we mean due process for judicial restrictions, executive authority unlocking most of dismiss, and 13 claims alleging lawful reparation, lawful due process given as the court's claims under special clause of judicial checks and executive authority will rights amendments restrictions government power countertermination authority distinct from policy authority is Washington jurisdiction applying restrictions executive jurisdiction by applying judicial due process dictionary.com no they cited the power to determine jurisdiction power doesn't indicate preferred termination A is that there is over limits court cases revolve around regulating executive behavior not banning specific policy determination limits the role of topic literature across the areas B is after a ban the policy affirmatives are solved by agent counterplans or affirmative because they range to go to affirmatives installed this year that construct combination never to stability competing determinations personal substance privilege T debates over war powers who does enough under affirmatives predicate predictable and grounded in the literature not T authority we mean judicial reviews and restrictions directly on authority across the unlocking most dismiss evidence from above and the war powers authority the president and commander chief authority Gallagher and 11 specific war powers authority constitution powers the executive authority as commander chief and their interpretation that means that we are the only topical affirmative killing affirmative that there are no topical there are no targeted killing affirmatives under interpretation you should order affirmative saluting the most popular on the topic of destroy from the ground which is already destroyed by agent counterplans height and 13 20 where Russian president powers established a very narrow topic no constitution course of religious drone use society across the public sector first restrict presidential powers to target U.S. citizens but even without any topical evidence restrict reduce presidential power because it goes to usage of power ratio and the violation of restriction and president war power says the president has a power attack in first place in judicial review on target killing restrict war power authority the AUMF is a justification McTelly and 11 the DG action the powers to reconstruct and unlock you assume source of authority the DG act and the AUMF was statutory your hand authority to retaliate against all kind of DBs and search based on overall interpretation of the AUMF and president constitutional war powers judicial restrictions war powers includes constitutional acts most of the action collect on the framework it has a mention for specialized court proceedings so rather than ex parte increase in legitimacy and accuracy to provide accountability breaches for any members of civil liability for official courts are familiar with courts or custom to having such justified by individuals sworn authority court processes with visually clear federal justice have authority permutation do that counterplan is not competitive it is plan plus the plan says that we should conduct judicial review for targeted killing through utilization of due process. They just attach that Congress specifies the particular remedy to court permutation to both that shields the links to Sheldon and 98 justification of political choice responsibility for thinking ahead and opinions to the politics relation with Congress and justice region thinking justice effectively to Congress will internal and executive the positive related to judicial behavior prompting strategic sources and the finally said politics and benefit because it goes through Congress and at least the court politics because it means that the court would be able to make liberal decisions. Those policy Congress can effectively direct judicial review Ukraine's error. And 12 Congress was at least as connected to judicial process of the act what the courts can really do when a contemporary server created the EPA but not the rule judicial review for judicial has no attention to the home precepts of the express ever opaquely call people do no and the court would ignore the remedy. This is Kevin's and 12 lawmakers a little time to term the constitution lawmaker investing constitutional decisions time for fundraising more than 70% of law for the courts to get a little bit of weight no pressure judgments on the constitutionality of legislation lawmakers and defend institutional prerogatives interpret the constitution but defer to the courts and the executive won't ignore the counterplan. He'll justify the statutory restriction of the court to get his way that rolls back the counterplan McKelvey and 11 Congress will pass legislation prohibits targeting killing Americans must reassure to the second branch or limited Congress any kind of faces either sort of a second branch position person is targeting killing authorities of the constitution Congress and prohibit targeting killing court found that such a law is not constitutional first and executive authority and no net benefit congressional checks would be abandoned in times of crisis means the counterplan necessitates future court action caught y'all and 13 that for several mechanisms Congress established to be more defined mechanism provided to destroy the executive branch to second yes taking decisions these mechanisms work out the great threat to national security emergency no guarantee that these programs be left in place of checks and resulting increase in executive army this cycle would previous something has to be litigated or rely on the court to uncover abuse of power and public won't trust that Congress is a saker and 13 means they cannot solve war fighting because it's based on legitimacy the meta issue of corruption of the campaign financing regulation the background issue the potential for corrupt trust and increase promising corrupt people see corporation hand out millions to fund campaigns they believe money's corrupt politicians was Congress 10% approval rating polls indicated 90% lead too much money politics believe in Washington but corrupt the trust over the last year's unlikely Congress to make out the approval of quite margin inertia on the west side exchange and the common as a solid judicial independence because you're forcing the judicial branch to go second and relegate their authority to Congress to second means they cannot solve Russia as external nuclear war decide to strong judiciary senses the world signal critical to democracy Kirsten 6 American peace and democratic states and law committed celestial gross more transparent better cooperating they will become increasingly independent economically sure common interests of ideas and liberal states peaceful liberal world order liberal peace increasing the shred of liberal democratic institutions independent judiciary in the core they read digital globalization global democratic values of liberal democracy justice respect political pressures international support can be lifeline enhance their prestige and reputation support for international sources represent most important the judges maintain any institutional power and allow good to be imperative to a limit situations to the authority judiciary judges and emerging democracy use foreign presidents to show up the independence and absent is democratic backsliding causes great power get and allowing the economy to power war has when another appearance some our conflict be ran to start probability major wars remain slowly weird system of the democracy is a fast running system on the record powers of the greatest change global panels of Russia is other capitalism more than viable and is never going to come should be for live in the universal democratic peace of you are always the China original prospect of antagonistic relations accentuated ideological rivalry conflict intensified arm races now the bond the war politics is at district court controversial now EPA ruling Adler 13 the DC court is according to environmental law DC has been the locus of controversy the almost EPA decisions about it in the Bush APA environmental litigation seeking more stringent application provide the high rate then seeking regulatory relief and targeted killing restrictions are coming now the court Jaffer and 13 the court of appeals ruled that the CIA has longer produced analysis agency has used in terms of targeted killing the CIA is unaccustomed to much rejecting secret using claims the appeals were willing between the premier traffic and deniability of reasonable reasonable cause as possible in court ruling against Obama commander-in-chief powers now judicial Washington 14 federal public court blessed the one for using authority to benefit the law the among laws using and received the deflected upside as a strong commander-in-chief power to disregard the law public court compliance its 29-page ruling issued between Obama received a similar spanking and no link the plan would be a district court ruling against the Jaffer and 13 judicial case targeted killing against the national McCartney court case when they use the district court for DC citizens and killing Yemen the national security context of federal courts are accustomed to task to perform the context of targeted killing and the court decides on the facts this is Rosen and 12 it did a constitutional independent on the divisive case also always play a part justice of pick and choose based on concerns about Texas Supreme President students not assume it's all about politics do so misunderstand everything constantly will quote about the Constitution capital is not finite Balkan 11 judges do not suffer first function because of bad decisions they're all done with them but they continue a lot of praise by the political legal establishment court capitals were punished with little effort and winners win little and 2K judicial review SOP posts its own position of massive political capital legitimate to review the judiciary to establish a budget to ensure that churches are functioning appropriately and Blomova now Ramsey and none of the experts Jeff Bond claims he was implementation of treaty have a lot of state laws with the Supreme Court being interested in narrow issues of Mr. Bond and significant federalism question of the rights of the Constitution is interpreted as a very liberalized conduct case and Bond doesn't matter for their impact who in 13 is the first time the court will review as it was only for a holiday favorable decision petition or Bond the practical impact of having Constitution agrees herself by executing 3 the President of the Senate has readily approved second executing treaties make important treaties have been approved by the petition they are not executing Bond might give the President of the Senate a sense to go self-execution might be difficult and today's Senate now politics and only court to jail the links is Passel into the court researchers fund decisions the clerk of the examiners intended Mark Blas the law committee president of Congress use of public court decisions and cover they cite the need to enforce decisions even though they disagree with them more evidence on this question Tanger Cats and 12 for health care very much money to change the way that the court should break on law 2 guards said that the respect for law will be a change because this will cost the political spectrum of Republicans Democrats and independents will be move despite the public speculation court decision when all 12 will be over the president cross apply the plan is DC Circuit Court Justice drafted evidence nullity because the representatives of the Supreme Court will cross apply that judicial court rulings are controversial now EPA rulings that come out to targeted killing restrictions that's Adler Jaffer judicial watch evidence above that should trigger the link and Syria triggers the link this is left and 915 Obama risk rapid stocks of unpopular war competence the administration's overall handling of Syria has the friends shaking their heads responsible for anything but measure going universal hot to argue with his performance and police like campaigns for Democrats and miscalculation for putting events on the deal and that's healing of religious to see hots beyond the small conference zone and no deal Clark in 922 push back against Republican efforts and the SSA some of them will live to see the U.S. plunge back into recession the president felt that he would not compromise Republicans wish to tie a budget defunding Obamacare policy the legislative action of the House and most
select boarding tours to confirm that he would oppose any attempt to move the vote to the Senate. Obama made a call to Boehner to let him know there'll be no negotiations. Expo's reviews popular, so many 13. It was interesting the broad consensus to keep parts from targeted claims. I would say we safeguards for limiting George Rush's legitimate. Well, let's our target 20 senators, Democrats, Republicans, up in the no-points. Israeli government has to review the fact we share from experience. And winners win. Dickerson 13. The challenge for Obama has to be right with the environment state. The president suspended legislation has to be used. People must go for authority. People must find. Republicans to do with this. You're waiting back down. Republicans to dissent on otherwise it can be unchanged. Restraints for this and cooperation. But over controversial issues can force Republicans to cause a rift and the party leave in disarray. And there's no impact. 10/11. Obama's warning of Armageddon in 1985. Congress 33 months in 1994. 4.5 months in 2002. 3 months in none of these cases did the world end.
Theory arguments.
I believe just like the permutation.
What?
I believe just like the permutation.
Okay. No reason for
Permutation do both. Yeah.
Okay. So this evidence that you read on the T authority question from Stephen Hyatt says that voting for. Okay. So you read this one-line card about winners win on court capital. The entirety of it says judicial review of SOP bolsters its own position or amasses political capital and legitimates the review. Why does that build capital? Is it just a question of it being controversial?
It's a question of the court's legitimacy. The legitimacy that is attached to the court. Even when they engage in liberal decisions, it doesn't necessarily diminish their political capital because they're seen as progressive.
Okay. The bond evidence that you read about why there is no impact just says that this is the first time that they've regressed the decision since Missouri versus Holland. Why does that mean that ruling on CWC?
The evidence indicates the evidence is a question of alternatives as a result of the possibility of the bond decision not being upheld in order to resolve questions of treaties and compliance with treaties. It means that the President and the Senate would defer to self-executing treaties in order to comply and increase international credibility.
Yeah, but if they're violating those now, then why is the plan, or why would there not be an impact?
If bond doesn't get upheld, that means that they won't violate the execution protocol.
Okay, so the only question
it's a shift. It's like if the dissent happens, President and Senate will try to solve it by being able to increase compliance with treaties.
Cool. So your argument is that the judiciary is irrelevant?
In a sense, yes.
Okay. Okay. Your evidence that you read, the first piece of evidence in the speech, where do you think this defines a restriction?
Restriction?
Yes.
I'm sorry, the target infringement on executive authority, application due process. It's talking about authority, restrictions on authority.
I don't see the word restriction anywhere.
Do we need the word restriction?
To define restriction, it seems like, yeah.
No, this is just like a we meet card. We're just like, we restrict the authority of the president. We are a prohibition. Like, we define...
Okay. What do you prohibit? What do you prohibit?
Prohibit the use of targeted killings without judicial review and due process.
Yeah, but he can still do them, correct?
I mean, the question is, restrictions are only restrictions on authority, not necessarily the target.
What piece of evidence have you read about authority and targeted killing? What piece of evidence defines authority in the context of targeted killing?
Authority in the context of targeted killing? Yes. We read a piece of Gallagher evidence that talks about war power authority being considered commander-in-chief authority. And also the piece of McKelvey evidence which says that the authority that is used to ground...
targeted killing in it?
It talks about the use of drones. Yes, targeted killing of law comes from two sources of authority. The DOJ argued the AUMF serves as the statutory grants of authority to retaliate against Al-Qaeda. We have evidence that's in the context of targeted killing. This is an answer to extra T as well. Some of the answers are kind of like, can be cross-applied to each other. What's the order again?
T restriction and then the final one.
Okay. And watch your left up there, Melanie.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
Speech 2 and C, Kentucky doubles.
Yes.
Okay.
Close enough. Close, yeah. 1 minute at a time, it doesn't really matter. Doing the speech, very important.
I think the back leg might be... Yeah. The one of the legs in the back are uneven, so it's tilting like a little forward towards the panel.
I promise you I'm so uncomfortable with this.
What? No, they're tricky. No, so okay. This leg, yeah, there you go.
Okay, leave that one as it was.
This one was on a different level too.
I'll hold my laptop. Oh, there's a rant on top of topicality, so fair warning.
Okay.
Topical formalism must be a review process before the action not an explicit review. They have not counter-defined what the word restriction is, which means there's zero chance of them winning say you should prefer our interpretation of topic A subpoints broad definition of restrictions to store the terms meaning is must be strict for debate to occur. Hines and 3. The terms can be defined broadly by the number of concept references to how which completion and limitation regulation terms for different systems are not eligible for action called words that have been useful law. Also, it's a legal definition from the corpus juris second and legal dictionary the gold standard for debate about separation of power ribbon to 10. Recent case of place on dictionary rather than post-constitutional rather than contradiction play push role and the interpretation of core constitutional question to accept the use of the dictionary to define constitutional an exception. This is the best definition of Hill and 5. Depending on the also fair interpretation of the encyclopedia specific definition most corpus juris second independently of the most predictable interpretation. Even ordinary definitions agree that the plan is not a restriction and prefer comparative evidence Scheider around 10. Ordinary definition of restrictions does not include reporting, monitoring, supervising. Black laws defines restriction as limitation opposed to prohibit from action. Contra supervise and are to have an oversight or inspect. The definition of restriction is very different because agree with supervision condition, but not agree to restriction of license. You should prefer this position outweighs in terms of limited ground after an argument supervised. Freezing of the resolution determines what we can research regardless how fair that definition is. Suppressed definitions create incoherent and unprepared basic operations. The gold standard for accessing all the debate's long-term benefits to 90% of the debate is the research process. Even if they win that the mechanism is a restriction, let's make this clear, it is not a restriction on the president's war power authority. They read 2 pieces of evidence on this. McConey evidence that says the 2 pieces of evidence I can talk. 2 pieces of evidence on this. The McKinney evidence from the execution says that it does not say the word restriction in it. The piece of Steele evidence says that the courts can impose restrictions, not that the plan is a restriction. You should default to its interpretation. War powers authority is the president's discretion to launch and attack ex post. Doesn't do that because the president maintains the decision power only ex ante is topical. Vatican 13. Ex ante prosecutors target killing raise separation of power concerns review contractually for the executive ability to carry the operation of president war. The Constitution authority includes discretion requirements to review when the government for carrying out the authority has. Also, this distinction is important. Targeted killing authority's decision to determine what is imminent ex doesn't challenge that authority, but it's just after the facts and revision of the fact that using the right definition only ex ante is topical. Calvin 11. Targeting the just commanded military forces as exclusive authority over determining whether the situation of individual president imminent threat. These are emergent constant subject to judicial review. The knowledge president imminent night content is require the court to determine ex ante court decision. There are 2 conceded ground arguments for interpretation that they do not be the word. But A subpoint is the limits argument as interprets that anything that makes it slightly more difficult for Obama to execute his authority's restriction that's unlimited and makes it burden because what is difficult is inherently just subjective. I got out of the cross-section that the plan is a limitation because it is a deterrent effect. There are tons of things that can be deterrent effects, such as putting pressure to terrorists or Obama's guilty about killing them, or making more paperwork, which makes him because he's lazy, doesn't want to fill the paperwork. Also publishing the cost of the things, a bunch of transparency answers for all things he happens at the second expose the topic person 13. It's not possible to test many fully address many permutation potential review mechanisms for target killing. The second argument which conceded is the ground argument means that the act is an infinite number of areas to target claims off of just a review on a bunch of different areas. Guts coordinate ground because we don't get the ex authority good argument because the act does not prohibit that form of restriction, which means we do not get offense. Means any type guts any type of uniqueness or type of impact terms either on the target list area or the restricted cell. There we meet argument. This is the worst evidence I have seen bearable. The McKelvey evidence says that judicial review implicates executive separation of powers. Yes. That does not mean the review is a restriction on the war power authority. This evidence is also the evidence not about ex post review. The evidence is about an effort of father get an ex ante prior injunction. And I'm reading line on the card here. Analysts for the filings from the district court for the District of Columbia an injunction in injunction against the targeted killing of a son means that their case is a question of topical app. They misinterpret the evidence. The last part of the highlighting is about the implication of the president's state secret power, not is war power, which will not be topical to restrict. The court expresses discomfort with the potential implication of due process rights and executive power. This would be a massive overload because it would mean that every court ruling that relates to executive power would be a restriction, which would devastate the topic. No counter-interpretation restrict means that you can vote negative on jurisdictional question because they not be with the burden that they are topical and that they are topical, which means that the affidavit doesn't justify the judge's resolution. They read a piece of Al-Bakudi, we meet evidence the Al-Bakudi cases about preliminary injunction, which I just ranted about above. The evidence has also misrepresented the part they have highlighted to be restriction does not say the creation of judicial rights is a restriction. It says the suspension clause in the Bill of Rights are restrictions. The suspension clause prohibits Congress from denying habeas corpus rights, and the Bill of Rights contains stuff about, Bill of Rights, but those are restrictions. The plan is not either one of these. This evidence is not a definition, there's no intent to find. They say the authority definition. I do not think this gets you anywhere but in a world of hurt. It defines authority to the power of the act. We're the only ones being targeted killing restriction, which is a question before the act. I already answered the act of here because it only happened. They have two arguments that are not responsive. The first is the over-limits target. No link to the over-limits target. Core cases under interpretation still revolve around regulating executive authority and behavior. You can still do all other reasons, such as the national security card. T argument is a question of how those regulations should be, what those regulations should be, not what the target of those regulations are. And even if they went to a certain limits target and shoot air negative, all limited rather than unlimited. It's something that's definitely they have sent 40s ratings, 60,000 articles, and never get to put in debate around CSB, or anyone discuss the majority of the topic in the areas to talk about lack of technical or in-depth discussion because the community always baptizes the topic in favor of the app. B, so someone be some points where rewards paid to work hard and thinking on research no matter how hard you try to limit how it makes it impossible for any individual to create success with the help of a large squad. Even having a large squad doesn't mean you have a coaching staff, people that committed to cutting cards or interpretation where rewards free riders have a large team that blocks everything for fun. The second argument is the after-ground argument. Look, there's no link to this after-ground argument either. Our interpretation is not that you must ban an entire area, a terrorism storm. I went on a UMKC. This is a reasonable interpretation. Restriction on a single area is fine. It just has to come prior to the action. This is a competing interpretation. Absolutely not valid. Is a competing interpretation. Ace points the app is when the app is not reasonably topical violation proves and also doesn't have a counter interpretation, which means there's no risk that it happens. B, some point is unreasonably bad. It's objective. The difference is impossible to quantify. Debate implies to competing claims and encourages debate. Best for education, judge intervention, undermine the integrity of the activity, exposed to limits. Dozens of exceptions to interpretation can be made to the topic. Anything can be reasonably top. Go to the top of the counterplan. Counterplan has the Congress has the bill that states the president is legally accountable to judicial experts review of target killing operation. If the president does not adhere to the Congress mandates, the Congress will seek redress, which causes the court to accept certain rules experts review is enforceable. There are two arguments. If they win that, they do not ignore the counterplan. That's fine because Obama would effectively self-restrain himself to experts free. If not, it means that the Congress would force him to do because they rule this happened. How did it happen? There's a solvency rant I'm about to go on. Look, you should have a lot of leeway on the counterplan to solve the case. There are two arguments. Ace points is equal evidence and cross-acts on laundry list of things that are key to solve the international norms. With the absence of all this is the only internal link they read about how other countries will receive the mechanism. B, some point has no idea what the plan does besides the enabling X post-factor review of the target killing. If that is something which the president gets impeached, other random mechanism, I have no clue. You cannot look me in the face and say, I think the app mechanism is fabulous and better than the evidence you're reading, because the app evidence doesn't say anything. See, someone is the counterplan results in judicial review. Let me make this very clear. That was on the overview. There's no way the two can distinguish the plan's review mechanism from the counterplan review mechanism because we result in the plan. There is not any type of theory argument against the counterplan. No, one of our responses, they say a piece of J for evidence, but this argument is J for evidence. It doesn't. J for evidence is not about Obama or the authority. It simply says that there is advisory action to the courts and force not only through the counterplan. They say permission to the counterplan. Severs. A point is a branch that they use a judicial restriction. We are a statutory restriction. The counterplan doesn't feed out a ruling. It's just a result of presidential noncompliance. B point is the grounds of the ruling. The plan restricts presidential war powers authority. The counterplan eventual ruling just affirms the Congress has already restricted the president. B. C. Point is this voting issue rejected in terms of no cause involved in one area based on negative solution. Always of the applicants who give the last speech. Severs is voting issue makes it possible to have a conversation. Interpretation to both interpretation of the plan and the counterplan happen simultaneously. Otherwise, the app can create a time frame argument and immediate disadvantage per at least in the benefit. Of course, has to spend significant political capital and risk, institutional legitimacy, imposition against the president. Historically, what because of fear backlash and fear state opponents in Germany foreign policy cases. Also, incorporating new grounds and intrinsic the counterplan does not feel new legal grounds, new legal standards, or eventual resort of the counterplan voting issue on political add-ons to use strategy. They say judicial links to the counterplan. This is not legal. The counterplan avoids the judicial capital link argument to below 10. I'm saying separation of powers and requires the courts not to the executive complaint judge court, but effective judicial liberties are impossible by courts for orchestral operation of executive action. The courts actually defer to Congress. You better course of relations to legitimate system to protect the courts and constitutional also constitutional liberty and our hostilities. I will read more evidence on this if they make a card responsible. They say Congress will go to the second plan. The second, they say the next two cards are all about the status quo policy. The counterplan feel mandate is yes, there will be review of the counterplan leads to follow. The counterplan leads to judicial incorporation. The act executive non-compliance causes judicial violation. The people will review against the president. This is consistent with Hamdan Fisher 10. Examiners listed by the court Hamdan did not see the difference. The president could refer to Congress and determine what the Bush action correctly. The arms of courts refer to Congress. Courts will follow suit. The research and legal private section 7 private interest and explicit statutory restrictions are illegal no-brainer. The court will close off any attempt of presidential invasion to pull an 8. The court will direct when adverse implemented by the president possessing 30 people acting the power powers courts not such structures in the cases of statutory rights by the constitution the possibility the courts remain historically the courts see congressional approval for executive acts. The court will not allow for the president to act on the president subject to protect the national security. They read a piece of senior they read piece of cat evidence has no benefit. This is not a Congress counterplan. The executive will ignore the counterplan. This is not true. We have fiated that the courts will result in the plan. So if the executive ignores the counterplan, he would also ignore the AF, which means you vote negative on presumption. The second argument is that the counterplan doesn't solve judicial independence. Let's make this clear. One, they do not have a judicial independence advantage, it's a judicial review advantage. This internal link evidence says that judicial review would lead to judicial independence, which means if I win that the counterplan results in judicial review, which it does because that's what it fiats, solve the entire case. No new arguments on this. Draw a line from the two, it's either 1 error. This is explicit and a very long counterplan, and the head cross looks to clarify these tricks.
Okay, we'll take prep.
Right now, I have a panel with 3 judges filling the paper.
Topical under your interpretation?
Any app that is a restriction ex ante.
Yes,
so
any plan text.
Right? That's not the plan text. The plan text is ex post review.
I said give me plans.
Oh, sure. A national security court, a national security court, anything that says Obama has to consult with...
Can't Obama comply
not
with
a question...
national
let's make this clear.
Court?
It's not a question of compliance. It's a question of when those restrictions occur. Yours happens after the targeted killing has already been done.
We impose judicial review immediately.
Look, let's make this clear. We established this in the cross-ex. The only example...
Okay,
I'm going to answer this now, and you're not interrupting. The only answer you give me is civil damages, which requires a targeted attack and someone to be shot with a drone strike first. Means the drone strike has to have happened.
The topic says that we need to restrict authority. If the plan is fiated, doesn't it restrict the authority of targeted killing immediately?
I have read... Sir, Neg is the only one reading questions on this, that the authority is not generic war powers authority, but it's the president's discretion to launch an attack.
You say that none of our evidence talks about restrictions. Do you have any evidence that speaks to judicial restrictions or defines judicial restrictions?
No, and that would have been a nice QC argument.
That would have been a nice... Okay, but you said the burden was on us. If there's no existence of judicial restrictions, then how do you have interpretation?
So I have read evidence that the effect of a restriction on war powers authority must come prior. So even if it's a judicial versus statutory, they both... is the question of when that restriction occurs, means it has to come prior to the attack is launched. So even if I do not have judicial review evidence,
another question
I do have evidence that says it has to come before the attack.
What ex ante are topical?
Sure. So any act that requires judicial or congressional approval before the attack happens, there are multiple mechanisms for that. Consultation, CAL's OCO act could be adapted for this, the National Security Court act. These are all examples. Article 3 courts.
So it's not a question of compliance, it's a question
Yes, it's a question of what and when those restrictions target. And the target has to, or restrictions have to target prior to the authorization of whatever the war power authority is, not after the attack has been done.
Does the counterplan fiat that the courts do judicial review?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, not the plan, though. So, what happens in the world of the plan? Do you want me to explain this before you mess this up, too? Yes. All right. The counterplan has Congress pass a bill that says the president has to do judicial ex post review and conduct himself, because there is a mechanism for this in SWO, which we have established.
This is not answering my question.
The second argument is if the president ignores it, that means...
Let's get back to the question because everyone is confused. Does the counterplan fiat judicial does judicial review?
If he, whatever reason, does not follow the first part of the counterplan, which we have read evidence he does, that means Congress will go to the court and then challenge that decision. The counterplan does not fiat judicial review. It is a result of the second plank where Congress would go and challenge that decision. The result of that, we have read evidence that says it would result in judicial review because the courts would side with the counterplan.
Are you arguing that Obama's just going to comply outright, or are you arguing that the counterplan...
There are two scenarios for solvency. Either one, it's awesome, he complies with the first...
Which scenario you're picking, because you can't have both?
No, these aren't contradictory. Either he...
Yes, they are.
Either one...
Obama either complies or he doesn't. Which one does he do?
We say he complies. If he doesn't comply, we still have the second plank of the counterplan that resolves that.
So you say he complies. I can see that.
Politics and then court politics.
Sorry, which politics first?
Debt ceiling and then bond.
Yours politics, then court. Politics?
Yeah.
I wish everything just got
the flash drive's right here. Sorry.
Yeah.
It would be amazing.
Pedaling isn't nice.
I have a flash drive for you guys.
Of course. Yeah.
Politics not going for a will. Concede that the court shields the link counterpart solidity. Risk of the link term now. The court politics collapse for treaty credibility, destroys confidence building measures, and arms control agreements causes war in the short term. This had also solves the efficacy of the Mueller evidence reverse causal that these organizations solve war because they provide a framework for negotiations and de-escalate conflict terms. Had to be clear at all 13 petitions direct the Court of Congress implement trees that affect the matter of the local concerned petitioners have to reach to the Congress that Congress implementation power need not impair the U.S. power to make sure these for false assurance the part of make sure these implement the military leaders by if Congress does not fully implement the treaty the U.S. not be unable to honor its commitment that's but under the U.S. foreign policy priorities to the U.S. credibility as a world leader if our treaty parties perceive that the U.S. cannot guarantee enforcement of treaty laws they may walk away in terror hathaway all 13 international obligations limits on detention to authority transgressing these would put the United States in violations commits could alienate allies and the global residents terrorists make it more difficult to encourage justice with the United States credits incredible partner for future agreements that the unique just by curving the 2AC reread the 1 and C evidence they've missed the boat bond will win inevitably just a question of if the court makes their own ruling about CWC not applying in this specific instance or if they make it broad ruling both teams apparently now agree the bond will win on narrow grounds now group the EPA thumpers and the other two restrictions covered all of these evidences about circuit courts which means that doesn't implicate any of our link arguments even if they're right you should default to issue specific uniqueness the court will the court will rule on grounds that which preserves treaty credibility. Roberts has enough capital. Rossin 13 against the spectrum of partisan division meeting expecting Roberts to correct the ACA for placing the bipartisan to bipart legitimacy of the court of measures on ideological gender with Roberts is Europe's praise on both the left and right country competition brings political genius and handing the practice to the victory. He thought that it's not to say that Roberts has his green factor to himself as a liberal. He increased the political capital allowed to the court to conservative direction. The court of conservatives 65 conservatives 4 liberals with partisan division will continue highly visible case in which the court states the chief justice with conservatives now. This DC circuit argument Supreme Court should be the actor of the plan to seek clarifications when you should have specified across anything else was negative ground it's impossible to be negative because we lose court counterpoints and this says the whole half is in the context of the Supreme Court which means they can't solve already a few lines of their evidence the city who the Supreme Court for robust evaluation of the case in the wartime context suggests is expectations with favorable to rule of Father McCormick evidence the Supreme Court has allowed the U.S. to detain alleged terrorists and the DC circuit would ignore which takes out the entirety of solvency of this and the actor of the Kitty 13 the EPA and the after against the DC Circuit Court of Appeals has called for the factors of parties to make sourcing building gallons of biofuels this case has contact the hills of the building from the DC Circuit Court of Appeals which tries out the building to sell you low power for the EPA to play to ignore the applicants valid ruling and to punctuate their December the court has actually double the mandate essentially the EPA has come to go for the Rugen has acted metrically put the appeals to the appeals court finding now that the link to make a group at the liberal decision of the plan of boldness the Supreme Court to shift and make a conservative ruling on bond to and rule that CWC implementation statutes are a violation of federal injustices are concerned about public opinion to make calculated decisions and balance decisions that means liberal decisions are followed by conservative ones that's the haste and evidence appears prove the link even when the courts aren't when the cases aren't related robbers short of capital short of political capital by making a liberal decision on healthcare marriage which gave political shelter to rule against affirmative action in the Voting Rights Act you should promote the specificity of our Roberts rule leverage political capital he earns from liberal decisions making extremely conservative decisions on other issues where 13 Roberts surprise decision to join forward to more liberal members supply the decisive fifth decision that hold healthcare receives the case that Roberts to cure amount of political capital he infects fellow conservative justice fighting to fight the brother stable that causes engaged more than the limit to federal power ever having the loss in the plan will cost Obama political capital with the course making the court more likely to rule against him in other cases Johnson 3 win yes political capital administration could be successful in influencing the Supreme Court's decision to chief justice and no a strong practice more likely than a weak person to sanction the court because the former political capital administration with strong chief justices have to be successful administration to justice is not straight far from executive policy. Now, they say that judges vote on facts. Not sure all of our link arguments prove that's not true. Empirics prove justices will switch between liberal and conservative votes because of the plan. That's the one to see. Hasty efforts explaining why justices will break ranks with ideological ideological coerce if they perceive the court's credibility. Severus Crossan, observers expect Roberts to strike down the affordable character. However, Roberts showing for local positions to the case which the court's institutional legitimacy is the stake. The chief justice makes great grapes with colleagues. They say capital doesn't trade off all of our trade off in the arguments above prove this even if it's not a question of capital, it's a question of how it affects momentum and
Winner's win doesn't apply to our argument or our link. It's a question of ideological shifts. I explained that all above. The court has to save capital controversial decisions, burn up priority. One, adjust quite extensive support. Obviously, group religion justice will care throughout the willingness to comply with decisions. These justices will care about avoiding application sanctions in school. These cases illustrate the court trying to protect the act of avoidance decisions that might harm desegregation efforts. Where the court has to consider whether the political opposition knew would be sufficient. Now the internal link debate broad ruling on bond discretion's global treaty credibility there. Every sole speaks of how the Senate and Obama would apply, but they are complying now to one see evidence says failure snowballs there. This is not assume future failures or how judicial decisions are perceived. The broad ruling for bond would crush global treaty credibility, meeker at all. 13 and 2 is that new rule to the federal government to hire those two. And the treaty that such local behavior would be supposed to say significant not workable traits of the president. Negotiate games for power to have nations closely monitor legal developments in the United States treaty partners. While the U.S. judicial decision to make the treaty obligation, the court did not impose rule that these foreign perceptions that the government could force the U.S. obligation to resulting in uncertainty would really have to the U.S. bargaining position. The court of switch votes Gibson and doesn't think the court is currently figures sound like consistently just point either the right or left. Robert's going to make a decision to close the right or ideology.
We'll take preparation 10.
Mark the ideology.
We have
740.
Yeah, 740.
pass, but
See, that's why I had the card.
just put like the
feeling
UK logo
just...
below it. That would work for like the WoW cap.
Yeah.
Do they say fear our past, whatever, on the envy our past? Do they say all that stuff on the back?
No,
envy
the back's
the future,
totally
deserve the past, or whatever.
Something past.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish we had some words on the back.
Is there anything else you'd like to do before we get to siege?
I'm sorry. Do y'all have it? Oh, never mind. Well, that's going on. Order is court capital, the counterplan, and then T. Marcel, you need a speech, don't you?
Yeah, just pass it to me and you can start and I can open it.
Are you sure? Can you mute the flash drive back? Thanks.
Yeah, just go ahead.
Are you sure?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
Evaluate the lead before the impact, otherwise you hyperinflate impact arguments that they don't have uniqueness or any of the terms of case argument. We have specific evidence that their internal links are not true across the by Ariel Thumper. There's already been a ruling in the appellate court which is higher than the court of the affirmative that rules against Obama says the oversight of command chief powers is about to be a flood of cases coming in masters in 1814 to defend and calls the ruling Obama doesn't have the constitutional authority to change constitutional law bills as political agenda. This ruling combines the beginning of flood or flood states reverse administration and reestablish SOP. The police court of the NRC by the law. The plan is going to be done at the circuit court level. That is the only test case that can be relevant. That is our draft for evidence. Seriously, clarification is fine. You're at a disadvantage. That asserted that oration was the Supreme Court. We obviously didn't take a stance. We obviously didn't take a stance on the one I see about that. We have no topical burden to do so. The only time that we had a speech time to respond with evidence of the 2AC, and that is why this question should be based off evidence, not assertions. Which is why we waited until the 2AC to read that piece of evidence internally turns all their arguments because it encourages better research. Their advantage. They read cards that are advantages about the Supreme Court that is not relevant because the DC Circuit Court level will be sufficient to have judicial independence and all of our evidence just a judicial ex post review in the abstract that the McCormick evidence and the Sidu evidence uses the Supreme Court as an example of how that can be implemented. There's no rollback argument because we get durable fiat. It wouldn't get appealed. It would not get appealed to the court. It would not get appealed to the court even if that were to happen. There's only 1.14% chance CLC in 13. The justice said it was case of year, but in a year the Supreme Court gets about 7,000 per year. They decided not to hear the case of decision. The decision would go down to a lower standard. There's no spillover around the issues. People rule predicated upon the facts that there are tons of rulings that happen every single year. It is silly to assume that the judiciary is going to switch on these votes. You should have a very high burden for them to prove their link argument. They don't have a single card that connects a plan to. There's sometimes you change the ruling on the bond decision. Now reading the Johnson card and the one in our means you lose. You framed this argument that Obama losing to the court would be sufficient to take all of the court's capital. That means that the counterplan would link to because it has the Supreme Court rule in order to enforce it. The counterplan links sufficiently, which takes it out now. The judicial right spending capital actually increases their capital to be durably fiat. It means that it means the enforcement will increase institutional legitimacy. They won't be scared to use more evidence. Harvard Law Review 11 or reasonable objections that the court is politically constrained. The banking model political capital spend the court increase institutional capital by exercising judicial review. Here's more evidence that the court only rules based on their ideology. This only rules based on their ideology. Cross and Nelson in one the normative political position because the judicial decision making out of basic political ideological policies and their guard to consider other institutions just their characters by liberal conservative describing ideological position because they don't appear to support the political model of judicial decision making. March of the word decision making. Now the Congress remedy counterplan extended. They have to pick one. Either the executive is going to lose or the executive is not going to. The executive doesn't do anything that doesn't solve any of the affirmative because it doesn't result in judicial review. We read tons of pieces of evidence by that is critical to our warfighting advantage. Even if it doesn't result in the executive losing this and the judiciary acting independently, which means it doesn't set a sufficient model for Russia. The collapse of the Russian economy, which the disadvantage makes you the war and extinction inevitable. That is the David evidence and the Filcher evidence. It also means that democracy collapses, which are the disadvantage because in that event that happens, treaties going to be enforced. Exempt permutation of the counterplan they result in judicial review. Our plan text says that the court should just conduct judicial review. This links even if the implementation argument isn't true because the counterplan creates a congressional remedy for judicial review to happen. Yeah, exactly. You just change the actor who was conducting that judicial review, which means the counterplan is functionally plan plus exempt permutation. Both that obviously shields the link because the counterplan links efficiently and also because the judicial branch should just be enforcing what the Congress already told them to do. Our advantage isn't based on judicial reviews, based on judicial independence. That was Reinhard Kirby made also. All of our impact evidence of the judiciary has to be seen as being bold and out there. Now extend our evidence. The court is just going to rule for Obama. Obama will be able to sweet out them so they don't end up enforcing everything. The court is going to be way too timid. All the counterplan does is grant cert. It doesn't mean it doesn't feel that the court actually rule it out. It doesn't rule that the court actually doesn't feel the court rules in his favor now. The topicality argument. All of their arguments are just creative boxing. The same exact reason why ex ante is topical is the reason that the affirmative is topical because we just changed what the enforcement happens. They don't have any ground distinction. They don't have any ground distinction about enforcement. The plan is to judicial restriction of war power authority. A, applying due process limits executive authority over targeted killing. That's what clearly from the 2 ACR evidence reflects your recent court decision for the DOJ the position which is more qualified and predictable than their evidence. B, constitutional rights or restriction under restrictions on the executive authority. Our interpretation is precise, has an intent to define within the context of the Al-Awlaki killer targeted killing case. C, their argument conflates policy from authority. Judicial review is an on-face restriction for the current authority claiming the executive to say due process does not apply to targeted killing. Also, restrictions are limited, or limitations on prohibition. CSE and 12 restrictions of limited qualification being restricted such as to degree control. Finally, a short prohibition distributing the usual order and obedience. We conclude the phrase restricted not authorized to per se ban restrictions that happen after the fact. EH RC 91. Everyone has the right to freedom to peacefully assemble. Restrictions shall be placed on the exercise of these rights as long as elements are recommended after the fact. The term restriction not be applied to term including measure taken after meeting. Ex post review limits the scope of authority. Hoffitz and 13. Ex post review when it serves me function providing security over the underlying legal basis for targeted killing and for the victim remedy. They must be able to say what the law is on targeted killing. Judicial review can resolve the question based by the permissible scope of armed conflict. Now, the president can always ignore a ruling, which means the ex ante case isn't topical under your interpretation. Either their interpretation mixes burdens because they have to prove that the executive is going to circumvent the act or can still possibly do something in order for us not to be topical. You should be focusing on what the president may do after the plan, not what the president can do after the plan. The president may not kill people without due process. He would be punished for doing that. The plan creates a precedent for that. All it does is affect enforcement. In fact, just specifying the enforcement mechanism. All this is specifying an enforcement mechanism, which is ultimately better for the ground because it means we are more specific and allow them to have better disadvantage links. Their interpretation is flawed. Constitutional rights are checked on executive authority. Prefer evidence. A, insufferable limit on the topic. B, negative ground due process laws and court link arguments to court generics relate to deference and the political question doctrine. Their interpretation is bad. A, topic education. Our firm was about the legal authority to engage in targeted killing without due process. Their interpretation undermines precise debates about the questions of authority. They conflate the literature. They make this argument about lazy debating. If you would research both sides, you would see that ex post review the counterplan crushes the ex ante affirmative, which means this is the better affirmative for people to read. B, affirmative ground ban specific policies like drones are turned into water to any type of agent counterplan. You should err affirmative because the range of good affirmatives is very small this year, and the negative is strapped with an arsenal of generics. Come on, they have the executive order counterplan, which would obviously solve their affirmative. They are just quibbling because they didn't have anything else to say but topicality. Their interpretation would destroy the targeted killing area of the topic in the detention area. Unlimited topic is better than an arbitrarily limited one. The negative can always cope with lots of affirmatives because they have tons of generics. That ground outweighs the one he sees the starting point for the debate. And if we lose to an obvious counterplan, then the quality of debate will go down. Reasonability is better. Your role is not to craft the topic. T is not a strategy. Have a high threshold for voting. Otherwise, going for is over incentivized, which trades off into debates about substance.
428.
absolutely not. The 1A does not get any response to this. They stated that they did not read a single piece of evidence about restrictions in their tweets. You were counter-defining, which means you do not give them any type of credit. Ask yourself this: if I was debating any of your teams or any Kansas teams were judging, where any Kansas judges were judging one of your teams, and the 2AC functionally dropped topicality, would you allow them to answer new to 1A? Would you be very happy to judge about it? The board is absolutely not. You should hold a right line to new 1A arguments because information sharp shape the development block. I wait for this argument because you do not have any counter-information or any type of we meet argument screws the entire 2NC strategy, 2NC strategy. Even if you decide to create new arguments, you should have read better evidence on the question because you do not meet our interpretation. The interpretation is that the only report restrictions must target the authority before it happens, not after. It means that ex ante is the only topical form of restrictions that cannot accident pose. We have fantastic evidence on the question. It's the only evidence that's in the context of the war's power authority. This is a key clarification. I think the block has massively missed a piece of bad evidence that war powers authority is the president's discretion to launch an attack. Ex-post doesn't do that because the president maintains the decision power on only ex ante is topical, which means there is no, even if they win in your counter-interpretation of the 1AR, which is a limit, it does not limit the war powers authority because that does not happen after the fact. Recovery evidence is also contextual about the targeted killing. I will read it here, reread certain lines here. Targeted killing suggests premeditated military force. The president has exclusive authority over determining whether the situation or individual presents an imminent threat. That means the authority happens. The end of the card says it will require the court to determine ex ante the scope of the decision in order to be a restriction. We have contextual definition. They have zero evidence that comes even close to it. I'm going to do the rant debate here. You should accept when they do not read a single card about limits or any defense or limits or restriction. If the restriction occurs after the fact, it is unlimited because it means that anything that could be a deterrent or make anything more difficult or this is impossible to define because it means that anything because that means it's up to the president. There is zero answer to this. There are a couple of acts that I have listed in this, for example. It means that they get post-review of every single individual type of attack, which means it's not restricted authorities. They can also make it difficult for Obama because they can, for example, do what Kyle says. He says they should post the amount of money each drone attack costs because that would deter the president. Also means that they can fill out more paperwork. These are all minuscule acts that there is no type of thing. The core ground argument is also important. Even if they manage to win some generic arguments check, it does not matter because you conceded the uniqueness argument. In the world of the app is especially true because they allow for the no matter what the restriction does or the enforceability or any question of solvency, the attack has to happen before an ex post review can happen. It means it guts all core negative grounds to not get impact materials errors or why restrictions happen. It also guts all the core negative arguments because the two examples I've given is the flexibility that if he can conduct all of the attacks he wants and then gets reviewed after the fact, it obviously does not constrain flexibility. It also means we don't get to have war powers because of the war powers because of the same thing. It means we don't get to have restrictions that bad arguments because the status quo functionally seems to happen after the worldly plan. It means even if I lose the reasonability, they should vote to happen here because there's no type of ground. Second, third, or easy out for you to even conceive of jurisdictional voter. The 2AC does not have a card with the word restriction in it, does not have a counter definition, which means there's no way for you to affirm the topic. This is conceded out of the block. I am going to go over there. I'm on the line by line. They say there's no ground loss. I already went on a huge range about why this is true. You've got it for uniqueness questions, which means that even if there are theoretical links or interpretation, means there's no way for the AI to negative to access these despite the links. The piece of McCaffrey evidence, the certain evidence. The piece of McCaffrey evidence does not say the word restriction. It is about war powers authority. The second piece of evidence, about constitutional rights. The constitutional rights can be a restriction, but even if they win that is a restriction, it is not a restriction on the war power authority because the restriction must become before the authority has been enacted, which is the key distinction about all the types of evidence. The piece of C2 evidence is the limitation equals restriction. You should not default to its determination. I have a couple of resistance arguments. A, this is new in the 1AR. B, some points the Heinz evidence is broad definition of restrictions to destroy the terms meaning because it's necessary and limiting which 9 term legal evidence. The B, some point is the legal standard. Rubin evidence is the default question of what restriction happens because it's the dictionary definition of how the Supreme Court has ruled questions of restrictions and authorities. The third argument is that we have the most ridiculous interpretation because every common dictionary also defines that the order definition of restrictions does not include reporting and monitoring and supervising. We have the only one that has an intent to find and also an intent to exclude what their interpretation of the topic is. We are massively ahead. The piece of half of the evidence says that 1AR half of its evidence says is not does half of about access review does not say the word restriction. The ECHR evidence is about freedom of assembly, which is not war powers authority. Should default to our interpretation. Also, even if they win these random types of little interpretation, there are two key framing stages. Their interpretation does not solve any type of offense. They have no offense or interpretation. The second argument was it has to happen before the fact happened. They say it makes the burden. This is false. Our interpretation is easier because it's easier. Yes or no? Does the restriction happen before does the statutory judicial restriction happen before or after Obama's allowed to do the attack? That's yes or no. Yours is the mixing burden because it means you have to evaluate the plan and see whether or not that would be a deterrent factor or happen to find. They say They say constitutional rights. I've addressed this above. Even if you win the constitutional rights, your we meet evidence from the 2AC is absolutely terrible. It's all about ex ante review, which means your we meet evidence says you are not topical because it says in review. I did a bunch of work on this. You've not answered any undesk from the 2AC. The piece of authority, the piece of constitutional evidence is misrepresented because the part they highlighted as a restriction does not say the creation of judicial review of the restriction. It says the suspension clause in the Bill of Rights, which means we have one the judicial review of constitutional rights is still not a form of authority. They say the ban Asian counter plans destroys the topic of the executive authority. Look, our interpretation is not mixed burden. It's still a restriction on the authority, not the ban the drones after this happened. The ban the Asian counter plan. This is not because it's still functionally the same authority target which happened. The second argument is that you get a bunch of things happen. For example, you can say the advocates, the loophole arguments, Congress key, judicial key advantage, and object field, which are all things that happen. They say no detention after target killing. Yes, target killing. All national security courts. Anything that requires prior congressional approval or prior judicial review, all forms of topical items. Competing interpretation. Look, they have not made a we meet argument that is in context of their interpretation or says the word restrictions or post review in the 2AC, not in the 1 hour either. Second of all, we have a bunch of disheads. There is no offense besides the nebulous executive order. And also reasonably back to the subjective difference impossible to quantify. The judge had mentioned unrest. The explosive limits, dozen of exceptions. The only way to evaluate meet interpretation is to determine that they have a reasonable we meet argument or a reasonable competing interpretation, which they do not, because both of them didn't exist in the 2AC and barely exist in the 1 AR.
504.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, but it's not even a slight on people wouldn't do it because it's crazy.
Yeah, I know. Like,
thank you, Toby. Of course,
I don't feel that bad because
your generosity inspired a whole conversation, Toby.
my boss is like, well,
It's over there.
what you can do is just give him like a corresponding reduction in time in other parts of the year to compensate. Because I was kind of like, it's more work than average work at a debate camp,
Right.
and they presumably they work 40-hour weeks and things like that. And so it's just like, well, just let them work leave early. Yeah. Okay. So, doesn't really work.
Okay. Everyone good? Okay.
Their characterization of the evidence is totally flawed and self-serving. They're just going for the argument that, you review after strike, therefore that's not restrictions for killing, but they forgot a couple of key arguments. Case in point is the conflation of policy authority. We on face with their interpretation or climate evidence, CAC evidence, unlocking most dismiss evidence, EHR evidence says that restrictions can occur after the fact because we still restrict authority even if the judiciary may rule target killing unconstitutional future. The immediate nature of the fine means the judiciary has the right to infringe on the authority of the president's war powers and restrict it through a mandated judicial review. The judicial review on due process is the restriction. This would always exist to prevent the war president's war power authority. However, the T violation only applies to our enforcement mechanism, which is after the fact the possibility that the president would be able to engage in drone strikes ex post. Don't evaluate the technical distinctions of the evidence for the sake of ignoring the illogical application of the plan's restriction on authority not to target killing policy. B is that the plan is functionally prohibition. The ECHR evidence and hyphens evidence says that the remedial capability of amendments-like remedy through ex post review be so restricted says they grant orders to the president that they profess the exercise of target killing and war power in the first place. Now they said their condemnation prohibitions are limitations, not restrictions are limitations, not prohibitions. As our client evidence preferred this interpretation, they conceded the permanent ground standard. They say they solved this because they allow for ex ante review, but their 1C definition says that restrict to prevent from action or restrain without grounds, or immediate prohibition with no possibility for compliance. They say that they're distinct for compliance because they're only focusing on after the fact review, but their definition doesn't provide support for this argument, so you should not evaluate it. If we're talking about competing interpretations or whether another interpretation is a good or bad interpretation, then you should reject it because it destroys and decimates affirmative ground, because you can still comply with an ex ante court. If Obama was rejected by an ex ante court, that means he can go back and review his policy and be able to engage in a new policy in targeted killing that will be able to take into account things like imminent standards, civilian casualties, etc., and that would allow him to continue to initiate a drone strike. Just because their piece of evidence that comes from a staff writer who's not necessarily qualified to talk about ex ante review says that it is a prohibition doesn't mean that he knows what the definition of prohibition means in the context of their own evidence that has the intent to define, which is their client evidence. Therefore, they cannot access this. We still get the links to the affirmative ground arguments, which are completely conceded as a result of this interpretation. That means that any affirmative that the President Obama can comply with would be untopical. That means that congressional consultation can apply. Congressional consultation affirmatives would not be topical because the President could comply with the congressional mandate or the recommendations that they're making to the President, or the consultation with the judiciary, with the judiciary, or with ex ante review, because that means the President could comply with the new targeting distinctions that he is currently making. That means that the only affirmatives that would be topical would be to ban the drone policy that currently exists, ban the detention policy. However, those affirmatives are solved by the executive counterplan because they're just fiating past the object of the policy. That means that no one will be able to win or be able to gain advantages that are predicated off the judiciary being good or Congress being good, which means they decimated. That means there's no world where the affirmative wins there's no world where the affirmative wins under their interpretation. There's only a risk of a large affirmative ground dissent. If we provide any defense to the net ground arguments, that means that you will vote affirmative. Now the line by line, they say that we have new arguments over the negative. The T violation. At first it was like qualifications are prohibitions argument, then it was about after the fact review. We read new cards to answer the 2 and T evidence explosion. That should be enough of a justification. They say that expose doesn't be restrictions because it still allows decision power. However, this makes its burden decision powers based on the focus mechanism and the targeted killing policy, not based off the fact that there's judicial review that currently exists and that is a mandate the judiciary has to conduct in order to prohibit the war powers authority. It's not a prohibition, it's not a restriction on targeted killing, it's a restriction of the authority of the president. That is what we need to learn about because that is what the topic justifies. Now they say that we have zero evidence that comes close to justifying a restriction. We read new evidence, we already justified why we should get to read new evidence and the 1AR. Even so, there is no interpretation of judicial restriction. That's why we have to use words like injunction, etc. to describe the mandates of the plan, because I'm pretty sure you've all tried to do T research, but the topic meeting made a big mistake mistaken, including judicial restrictions, because those things don't necessarily exist within the literature. Now they make this limits arguments. However, we don't explode the topic. There's only one affirmative that gets added to the resolution as a result of our interpretation. That is only ex post review of targeted killing. There's no literature basis for ex post review in the context of Congress and targeted killing, or ex post review of the Congress in the context of Congress and in terms of detention policy, or judiciary in terms of detention policy. The only affirmative that exists is the joint affirmative, so they don't get there's no limits explosion. It's infinitely regressive to vote against us because we got it for one affirmative. Also, you still get ground. You can be the politics dissent, the targeted killing, good dissent, the ex ante pick, war fighting, etc. But we are just a restriction. When we restrict drones, you should have enough ground to get that. People have been reading these arguments against us, and they definitely link against us. Now, functional limits check. That functional limits will be able to check because the executive order kind of plan would make the topic down to a manageable size, since O'Connor represents affirmatives always need to be have advantages that are contingent on circumventing the agent counterplans. Now they say that we're not able to get the flexibility dissent. However, she doesn't give a war fight. You don't get the flexibility dissent. As a result, we make a Bivens statute, which means that the military we held accountable has to pay thousands of dollars to people that have been affected by the military's operations. Obviously, that will probably cause some sort of chilling effect on military flexibility. Now your role is to decide whether or not affirmative made it impossible to make good is good enough. Ask yourself, was this really that hard to find in literature? The lawfare blog rants about this affirmative. That is the primary source for almost everyone's advantage cards. Every Lexis article that talks about drunk word mentions the phrase ex ante and contrasts that with ex post. Extremely easy to find. The academic consensus in our favor of the Vladeck evidence. I think that all the teams have read cards from, because he is the biggest alternate topic. Recommend to our affirmative. We link to the differences that provide due process to terrorists. Judicial reviews and restrictions and all that stuff. They're only winning our first mechanism. That's you can't do that. And if you use strict offense, defense, and topicality, go for this oversight advice, because the negative only needs a small contrived distinction to win. Because they might create a better limit that trades off a substantial debate about topic. Education outweighs because we change topics to talk about the specifics of each one. They say that it's impossible to quantify. However, nothing can be quantified exactly. So always go check when asking how much for limit explosion. We are asking you to vote affirmative because you have ground. We are asking that we're saying that we need arguments of massive link take up, and you shouldn't vote on the limits. In fact, unless there's a clear reason why we're going to the topic, our affirmatives in no way analogous to the affirmatives that have Obama pay people off or filing more paperwork. Those affirmatives don't say targeted killing without due process unconstitutional, which RF does anyways. Those are solved with the executive counterplan. By the way, those are the only two affirmatives that she gives as example for limits explosion argument, which means you should give her a very low threshold for the limits. And also the number of cases that we create is the only tangible impact of limits. You cannot vote on some appeal to precision and tie that to new affirmatives.
Donnie? Good? Yeah. Good debate. Good debate. Good debate.
The decision is a 2-1 for the affirmative from Kentucky. That was the one. I don't think you have an answer to this argument in the 2AC. I don't think the 1AR evidence is justified. I don't think the 2AR spends enough time telling me why it's justified. I literally have down the words shift and 2NC-EV. I need you to explain more detail how the violation is shifted, and I need you to point to particular 2NC evidence that legitimizes you reading new evidence. Ultimately, I don't think that, I think the topical version of the app exists that allows negative ground. You're characterizing this as the only thing that would be topical as a ban. I don't think that's true. Ex ante is T, as demonstrated by the multiple pieces of evidence they read. They also suggest other potential prior things. You seem to think that this is a question of compliance. Yes, the president can still comply, but the distinction I think you're missing is that after those plans, those pre-attack or pre-launch plans, has the president's authority, the unfettered authority to launch an attack, been restricted? And I think the answer to that is yes. The president has to go through more hoops in order to exercise that authority. By contrast, I don't think that is the case after your plan. You say they don't lose any ground. I think there were arguments made about losing X discretion good impact turns or links to you actually stopping X from being launched. The fact that you can still claim that you allow targeted killings after the plan without any prior restraint on those targeted killings seems to mean that you have cost them some ground. And then I don't think you do as good a job as I think you need to do debating out reasonability. I don't think you spend enough time there. I'm not a good sell on this to begin with. I think you need to have much more time devoted to that to explain to me why this is the core of the topic. I don't think your assertions about this being the only AF in the area of targeted killings and that it would destroy the AF's ability to debate targeted killings at all are sustained by evidence or experience at this point in the year. I think it's too early to make that call without reading evidence saying or pointing to more examples of why this is the only good AF in the area. And so the other thing, they had other cases in their case list when you asked them in cross-ex, National Security Court, congressional consultation, etc. Again, I think you misunderstand that this is a question of whether or not the president can comply. I think it's a question of whether or not the president's ability to initiate whatever it is unfettered has been restricted, and I think that's the part that was missed. You should be making argument, and lastly, I guess the fact that they characterize you as a deterrence AF and that there's an infinite number of ways, and there was a Brooks piece of evidence saying there's an infinite number of ways to execute judicial review. I think that also adds to the limits complication. Mind you, I did not think your answer to the judicial review question, not relevant to this debate, obviously, but I didn't think your answer to the judicial review question in the cross-ex of the 1AC was sufficient. I would expect more explanation of how precisely telling me examples of what could happen is not specifying what you do. And I think that could have become an argument in terms of using that Brooks evidence about the plethora of ways, and they won't even tell us which one they are. So that's the short version of it.
I agree that the AF dropped your definition of restriction. I just take the NEG's definition of restriction to prevent from action, to restrain within bounds. What I think is contested and needs to be debated a bit more and is left out there a bit by everybody is authority. I mean, the question of whether the AF meets restriction raises for me the question of what they restrain within bounds. I thought the 1AR in particular and then a 2AR extension, when I understood from the AF debating that the plan installed a due process requirement and then enforced it, I thought I was going to easily vote AF, and then I looked at the plan and that the plan doesn't really say that. The plan says should conduct ex post judicial review. I didn't really think that they challenged that the AF's kind of characterization of their plan as being a due process restriction, but obviously I wasn't going to take that for granted when that isn't what the plan says. So I then thought it got somewhat tough. But I do think that, and I'm happy to sort of talk through the specifics and answer whatever questions, although the particular review done by the plan happens later, I do think that the plan itself says ex ante that these decisions are no longer the exclusive domain of the president. I think that although I think that their policy versus authority distinction, it makes some sense to me in that although, compliance I think in one sense is relevant, which is that the act of targeted killing may not be restricted, or the president may still do it, just as the president might comply with other regulations, but he's no longer unfettered if he's subject to judicial review. That authority, for instance, the McKelvey evidence cards for both sides are kind of help me with this too, where the neg and the 2 and R in that card talk about how the president has exclusive authority. I do think that enabling judicial review, whether before or after, means that the president now has less authority than the exclusive authority he has now. It has been restrained within bounds.
What piece of evidence do you think the AF reads that counter-defines that authority is the only question of authority is his decision to launch the attack?
I think that, they read a card that says authority is jurisdiction. That's not obviously the 2AR. I think that the evidence, AF and NEG both, suggests that yes, his authority is his determination of whether an attack is appropriate. The actual conduct of the attack is not the same thing as saying it is his exclusive decision whether the attack is appropriate, legal. He is fettered by the plan as an ex ante policy.
Right. Okay, that's my second question. The plan that was in the 1AC we were given and the cross explanation is the U.S. federal judiciary should conduct judicial ex post review. How can that be interpreted as an ex ante?
Put another way, I think the plan's review is ex post. I believe its restriction on authority is ex ante.
Can you explain that part?
I can.
The restriction is immediately applicable
upon adoption of the plan.
Upon adoption of the plan, if you think that we're talking about, it depends on your conception of authority.
Right, what conception of authority makes that a ex ante review?
So if you assume, let's say, the president... Sorry, I don't...
No, please.
It could be interpreted that immediately after the plan is passed, the president no longer has authority to conduct targeted killing in the absence of ex post judicial review. And that is an ex ante restriction because it is immediately applied now.
Right, can you say that one more time?
Okay. So, immediately after the plan, the president no longer has the authority to conduct targeted killing in the absence of ex post judicial review.
Right, but okay, so McKelvey evidence, which is the only piece of evidence that's around that talks about war power authority, targeted killing. My reading is targeted killing suggests premeditated military force. The president has exclusive authority over determining whether situation or individual presence an imminent threat. These are general concepts of law sub-judicial review. Acknowledging its authority to define imminence is yet defined because it requires the court to determine ex ante the scope of those decisions. We have a card that says court restriction equals only ex ante. Judicial review after the fact doesn't happen, and it's a question of whether or not he can conduct those attacks.
I believe that the plan as a policy before any ex post review has to happen means that the president no longer has exclusive authority. That authority has been placed within bounds. It is now bounded by judicial review. Judicial review itself, as the other McKelvey card says, is an infringement on executive authority.
Right, but after the fact.
It is no longer the exclusive domain of the president to make these determinations. If they're open to review by the
Obama post
court.
the plan can launch every single targeted strikes he wants to, and then after the fact, a judicial court or whatever the judge is would then be like, yes, that was okay, you get damages or not.
If he does them, he is doing them with less authority than he would have been in the
I think the issue here is that there are two different definitions of authority.
Okay.
You all are saying authority refers to discretion to use weapons. And there's another interpretation of authority, which is jurisdiction or legal power. And if authority refers to legal power, then the plan can have some ex ante prohibiting effect. And if authority refers to discretion, then it doesn't, because the president can exercise discretion, but then review happens only afterward. And the issue is, when you are like, our interpretation's best, you're saying our interpretation of restrict is best. And actually, the relevant question is, whose interpretation of authority is best? Now, the AF, I think, more stumbles into some arguments that then defend an interpretation of authority. I don't think it's very planned, but by the end of the debate, I think you are absolutely right about your interpretation of restriction. They've not counter-defined it, but it begs the question of an interpretation of authority, and there's not very much reason to prefer your interpretation of authority over theirs.
I agree that they have definitional evidence that says authority is jurisdiction, but we have to find that authority in the context, or authority and jurisdiction in the context of targeted killing is yes, no, strikes.
See, I read both sides' evidence as saying that judicial review takes part of that decision and jurisdiction out of the president's hands.
Right.
Even the existence of judicial review.
Can you explain why you think our...
and I think I'll go a little farther in case you think the app really said that. Sorry.
Can you explain why our evidence reads that way? I understand why their interpretation might do that, but
I guess
I didn't read it as which one's factually correct. I just think there are two different ways to understand authority, and then assess from a normative which is the best interpretation for the purposes of debate.
Okay, that's my second question then. So even if they win that, it is a quote restriction on it. Clearly, we have read limits arguments that it's after these strikes happen, you've got core uniqueness ground means we don't get flexibility to size and those types of things. What is the response to why their interpretation solves that?
Well, so there's because there's the issue of restriction versus limit versus prohibit, and then the question of authority. There's kind of two different interpretation versus counter-interpretation debates going on.
Yeah.
And I think you fully win, like, procedurally, I did not even allow a counter-interpretation of restriction. And so, for example, like, our interpretation is most legally precise and all that stuff, just, you won, because they didn't even have a counter-interpretation. I thought that they won that their interpretation of authority was preferable to yours, because it, for the most part, once they conceded to restriction, it solved a lot of your limits arguments, because the plan had to be a prohibition.
Right, but if it's a prohibition, the two ground arguments I have myself making consistently from the 1 and C is, one is uniqueness. If all of these strikes, etc., can happen, and then it's just a question of the court being like, yes, no, civilian gets damage suits, that means there's no uniqueness ground for impact turns, targeted strikes, good, bad. The second ground argument I have is those are not links to flexibility or like the war powers game, because Obama can make all those decisions he wants, and then after the fact he gets punished. And I don't have like a 1-AR response to this or a 2-AR response to this.
I just thought it solved the limits. I did think that they responded to the ground argument when they were just like, hey, the plan places a restraining effect on the military.
How does that answer the uniqueness argument, though?
Well, it's not only a uniqueness argument. You still have, like, a link that's like, the plan reigns in military.
What is that link is if he can still do everything?
I think
he won't, I guess, is the argument. He can theoretically still have the, discretion to targetedly kill, but it is less likely.
That's where I think the compliance and enforcement analogy to other AFs is helpful too. I think they change policy in a way that other AFs do as well. I mean, I do think targeted killing, and I guess my other authority thing is I don't know what card to point to tell the AF that authority is simply the action itself and not the decision
what about
taken.
This McCulvey evidence? Targeted killing suggests premeditated military force. The president has exclusive authority over determining whether situation or individual presents an imminent threat. These are general concept laws, subject to judicial review. Acknowledging its authority definite its imminence, yet declining to do so. We require the court to determine ex ante the scope of those decisions.
I think that the plan means that the president no longer has exclusive authority over determining whether a situation or individual presents an imminent threat. And I think that judicial review, whether it happened, the right to judicial review means that the courts, the president no longer has exclusive domain over making that determination.
He doesn't have domain over determining whether or not when someone gets damages for if they're killed. How is that domain over the decision to do it? How's that authority?
Because this begs the question of authority, which one interpretation is authority is the decision to do it, and one is...
So anything that affects the decision to do it becomes authority?
No. Right. If authority is defined as jurisdiction, there is... The plan limits it because the president no longer...
How does it limit the jurisdiction?
Because the president no longer has jurisdiction to conduct strikes.
No, he gets sued if he does the strike.
Hold on, let me finish the statement. The president no longer has jurisdiction to conduct targeted killing without having judicial review.
And the courts... Well, but it's...
I'm not going to argue with you that.
Well, you are, though.
That's
so, I don't... Well, anyway. We can talk about it.
Yeah, so what can the 2NR do to fix this?
It is.
For me, I think... For me, I thought there was a bit of an over-focus on interpretation of restriction and an under-focus on our interpretation of authority is best.
So clearly the 2NR needed more time, but what substantive arguments with what I had prior to the 2NR needs to be explained?
Well... No, sorry. I'm just
collecting
processing. Yeah, okay. The two things that I thought were clearest arguments on interpretation of authority is there's no ground loss because the effect of the plan is to reduce targeted killing / presidential discretion. And so basically all disad links apply, even though that's not the mandate, it is the effect. And an ground argument that an over-focus on discretion as opposed to jurisdiction causes debates that center overly on practice that undermine ground because of the existence of the executive restraint counterplan solving most practice AFs as opposed to jurisdiction AFs. And then also answering the question of how it is the case that an AF can actually prohibit discretion given the omnipresence of non-compliance, like that all AFs can
why isn't the 2NR for the third point? Why isn't the 2NR explanation of like any ex ante review, like consult Congress, National Security Court, is that discretion because it means Obama must go to them and get approval for targeted killing? That interpretation.
Sorry, can you say that again?
So you said that we need a better explanation of how there's like an act that like prohibits discretion before the fact. Why aren't like the cases arguments like consult Congress, consult any type of court, National Security Court, any act that requires Obama to get approval before he decides to launch the act? That argument.
Well, I mean, more broadly, there was a lot of arguments being made that were not really, like, I know that you want your interpretation to be like only ex ante restriction versus ex post, but the problem was there really wasn't an interpretation that of either restrict or authority that exactly matched up with that, and you kind of ended up defending a little bit more than that. And
can you explain the defending part of it? You said we end up defending more than our interpretation.
Yeah, because the only kind of way that it can be construed to exclude ex post is if you define authority as discretion, but then you end up having to defend that interpretation, authority equals discretion, and that requires a little bit more of the AF than I think you realize. And
can you explain what is that?
So, I mean, just like essentially your interpretation of restrict means prohibit and authority means discretion. It's really hard to conceptualize what that means.
How can the 2NR make it clear?
If your argument is then the AF doesn't meet because the only consequence of violating the judicial rule is like cost or something like that. Because
how can the 2NR make it clear then topical or bright line check for this is yes, no, does Obama get sole decision making power to initiate the attack?
The issue is you need to have an interpretation.
Right. In ex ante versus post ante.
I know, but I know that's what you want, but there's my issue is that there wasn't a definition of restriction and a definition of authority that matched up properly with that.
Why doesn't discretion match up? I don't understand.
Because it kind of bites off more than what you want to chew, I think.
Why does it?
Because
the discretion to do something is the discretion to choose to do it.
Yes, but if you
things
define
that you do that discourage you from doing it by consequences that happen don't implicate your discretion to do it. They affect your choice on whether or not you want to exercise that authority. They do not affect.
I guess I'm left with the question of if the AF doesn't meet because the only consequence of non-compliance is like money, then what exactly is a topical AF given restrict means prohibit and authority means discretion?
In this case,
given
it would have been to
ban.
enforce to rule for his father in the first place and give him an injunction to prevent the strike from happening.
But how does that prohibit versus
because
discourage?
There's a legal prohibition from doing it.
But I think that the 1AR...
It's not a legal prescription which has a fine attached to it is different because that's a prohibition that exists up front. So a speed limit requirement that says if you exceed 55, you get a ticket is a prohibition on your ability to go over that is legally enforceable. A notion that if I drove fast and got in a car crash, someone might have the ability to sue me is not a restriction on my authority to drive that fast.
The 1AR
is
very...
making that choice.
The 1AR comes across very, very clearly to me as saying that the plan is the first one because it's legal now because the court cannot apply due process and other things, and the plan does two things. It says...
It creates a Bivens actions that you can sue people. The people who are harmed can sue.
Well, the AF also, I mean...
No, it doesn't.
The AF, first of all, having not really said what their plan does, the AF in the 1AR says, now that the courts can get involved, it's not legal. It was legal before because it was non-justiciable.
It's only ex post. It's a Bivens civil suit.
The 1AR says the plan itself means that it is now less legal or illegal because the courts can get involved.
It's legal for someone to sue the president.
that the enforcement mechanism of ex post review, but the policy itself means that it's now under judicial jurisdiction.
To have a civil suit afterwards.
Like you get fined for violating it?
No, it's not like a fine for violating it. That's enforced by the governmental authorities. This is private
I'm saying
suits
the 1AR
afterwards.
The 1AR makes an argument that...
This is me suing you for making a bad decision does not mean that I restrict your authority to judge.
The 1AR makes an argument that makes sense to me about what the plan means for how legal it is, and then the 2NR is built around not having answered restriction, which I'm completely with, but then the question is restricting what? And I think that opening it to judicial jurisdiction means that he's no longer unfettered by the law, even if the review itself is ex post. It's just not, that is conceptually
that
sensible.
Makes no sense to me.
We've had our disagreements before, and I still love you.
Has nothing to do with love.
Okay, so I guess this requires some reconceptualization on my part. What were your guys' thoughts on the counterplan 2NR?
Sorry, what's that?
The counterplan DA 2NR, was that an option?
I've talked enough already, but I thought that district court, I thought the neg block on district court was tough. Bailing so quickly that means they don't solve, is going to make it tough to win your disad.
Yeah.
So that would have been my one concern.
Okay.
So does the app have a definition of restrict?
They meet yours.
They meet prohibition?
Yeah.
Well, they meet restrain within bounds.
I think they meet prohibition once you define authority as jurisdiction. But, well, yeah.
Alright, thank you.
Okay.
Did the counterplan text actually rule, or did it just grant cert?
Just answer.
I don't think that.
I
I think you need to say the court will uphold Congress. Granting cert just means they hear it. It doesn't mean they rule in favor of the first half of the counterplan.
Okay.
I had like a real quick thing. If I had preempted before I read the restriction cards, like it should be justified from like 2NC evidence.
Yeah, I'm not sure the 2AR justification, even if I had it flowed, would have been sufficient. You need to explain why the hell you're getting. She preempts all of this.
Okay.
And there's a jurisdictional voting issue thrown out that you did not have an answer to this key argument in the 2AC. And you proceed to read a pile of new cards.
I was just wondering if if the justification's in the 1AR, do you think it's legit, or do you think I should just like shift the strategy and focus?
No, the 1AR, as long as you start justifying it. But the problem was I didn't have a link to his justification in the 2AR, and it was in the 2AR.
I agree that I didn't justify.
I think it has to be that your
1AR,
2AC card uses restrict and implicitly defines it when saying that the plan is that because it constitutes a judicial check on the executive, and then. But